get this in place. For the Plan Commission, Wednesday, August 30th, 7 p.m. Roll call, please.
Schneider? Goslin?
Here.
Harms? Here. Joseph?
Here.
McGrail?
Here.
And Lalonde?
Here.
And Peterson?
Here.
Okay, anything to be removed, added, or changed? All right. Approval of minutes from August 2nd, 2017, Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals. Has everybody read the minutes? Any questions, comments?
Not for me.
We have a motion to approve the minutes?
It's a small thing, on page 7, I believe. It's just a question of gender record. It's on the, Becky Cruz of Geneva stated that he has been a resident of Geneva for 25 years. He applauds the effort if the name is Becky, or, that's all. If it needs correcting or not, I'm not sure.
Also move to approve them.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, minutes are approved. All right, the primary reason we're here, the Campana redevelopment. And first of all, thank you all for being here. This is the third meeting we've had with regards to this subject matter. The two previous meetings went late into the evening with much public testimony, probably somewhere in the range of 5 hours of public testimony. Applicant had given a presentation with follow-up to a lot of questions, and then, of course, staff had given a detailed report. The purpose we're here for tonight, the Plan Commission, is to make recommendations on the zoning and the plat of subdivision that is before us, and that will then go to the City Council for a final decision. We will also be doing the design review that is final at Plan Commission. The format for the meeting will reopen the public hearing. We'll hear public testimony, and then we'll have a staff report. Those wishing to speak must sign in. Those who have been here previously and have spoken, we ask that you wait until all those who haven't had a chance to speak yet come forward first, and then we'll give you an opportunity to come back to the podium and readdress the commission. We request that we have no repeat comments. There's a pretty significant list of issues that have been addressed multiple times, and in that regard, we ask that you simply state that you agree or disagree with whatever comments that you want to make. This would be increased traffic, intersection and access improvements, parking adequacy, stormwater management, pedestrian safety, sidewalks, health concerns, conformance to comprehensive plan and zoning code, division of property, effect on property values, noise emanating from the site, child safety, jurisdictional issues with KDOT, Geneva, and IDOT, city services, need for affordable and accessible housing, and historic preservation, both the building and the site. Items that are not directly related to the zoning request that have also been discussed and presented include effect on the real estate taxes, effect on schools, perceived increased crime, the applicants submitted information for other jurisdiction applications, ambient noise affecting the building, social media anecdotes of the applicant as a landlord, effect of resident alien population, health concerns related to telecommunications equipment, radon, and asbestos. So again, we would appreciate that you keep your comments brief. We've been very lenient in the first two meetings, allowing applicants to come forward and speak their mind. Tonight we're going to adhere to a very strict 3-minute limit per speaker, and I will cut you off as respectfully as I can. at the 3 minutes. So again, be as brief as possible so that you can get your thoughts out within that 3-minute time period. I will also stop you if you're repeating previous testimony or off topic from the task at hand. Once all testimony is heard, we'll give the applicant an opportunity to respond to any new issues that were not previously addressed. Once we're satisfied that all testimony has been heard and responded to, we're going to close the public hearing. Commissioners will then begin deliberations. We intend to vote on the matter tonight. Now, that's going to depend on how long we're here. We typically have been limiting the meetings to the range of 3 hours. If we go a little longer than that, with the goal of being able to accomplish completion of the deliberations, then we'll do that. If we don't conclude tonight, we'll continue it to another night. We haven't decided amongst us what that night will be. We have regular meetings scheduled for the September 6th and is it the 20th?
Yes, it'd be the 20th.
And then we would have the opportunity to also continue it to September 13th. Just remember, please be respectful. If you're disruptive, repetitive, or off topic, I will stop you. Thank you. So with that in mind, why don't we get the public comments going?
Okay, going with folks that have not been repeated yet. The first person I have that has not spoken is Glenn Crozier.
Shall I open the public hearing?
I'm sorry, yeah. Let's open the public hearing.
All right.
Reopen the public hearing, thank you.
I so moved to reopen the public hearing.
Need a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, now you can speak.
All right. 6 years ago, my mother moved into the homestead, and it was a very serene environment, nice atmosphere, good location, reasonable traffic, great security, and during that 6-year period up to now, certainly things have changed. Not the least of which is the impossible traffic during certain periods.
These are issues we've already discussed.
All right.
So if you have a concern about traffic, just simply state that.
Well, it's my concern about the traffic is perhaps restating the obvious in terms of personal security and those issues. I think they are enhanced by having a project of this type across the street. And I'm sure that's been addressed as well. And I'd like to read one statement in conclusion that has been developed by this city that I think needs to be evaluated in your decision. The mission of the City of Batavia is to continually enhance the quality of life enjoyed within our community through the development and delivery of reliable and efficient municipal services. I don't see how this project does any of that, and I don't believe that it's in the best interest of the community and certainly the homestead and its 300 residents.
Thank you.
Next, I would have Bobby Kane.
Good evening. My name is Bobby Kane, and my husband Frank and I live on Blair Street in Batavia. I'm here speaking tonight on behalf of the Fox River Valley Initiative, a Kane County organization that is comprised of 14 faith, civic, and social service organizations representing nearly 35,000 residents of the Fox River Valley, including our church, the Congregational Church of Batavia. Over the past 119 days, almost 4 months, Since the Committee of the Whole meeting in May, there's been much discussion concerning the issues pertinent to the proposal to add affordable working family housing to preserve a unique historical landmark. It's time for the discussion to end and for you, our commissioners, to make a recommendation to our city council to support this project.
Thank you.
Next, we have Debbie Damon.
Hi, I'm Debbie Damon from Batavia. I just wanted to say that I agree with Mr. Kiefer, Attorney Cooper, and the young lady who got to read her husband's letter. Please do not separate these parcels, and please do not grant these variances. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Andrew Oswald.
Good evening, everybody. Andrew Oswald, born and raised here in Geneva, graduated from Geneva High School in 2008. I'd like to start off by saying, my father, my parents worked really hard to provide me with a safe environment to grow up in, and good schools for me to go to. But most of all, to be able to go outside and play, not have to worry about the things that, some children have to go through, living on the south side of Chicago, for instance. That being said, my dad, he did grow up on the south side of Chicago, back when it was still a nicer area to live, much like this town is today. Right now, we see what public housing has turned the south side of Chicago into in just a short time of 30 years. My concern is that what has turned neighborhoods on the south side of the city into now is what Geneva will become in 30 years from now. I personally do not want that. Now, that being said, the real reason we're all here today is because we are concerned for helping people less fortunate than us, and people who may be in situations that could possibly be seen as unfair. Now, if I saw this as being a solution to help those people, I'd be all for it. But as I think we've seen on the south side of Chicago and throughout public housing developments in the United States and throughout the world, these public housing developments do not help people to advance. The other sad and major downfall of this issue is it is not about prosperity. Whatever happened to people's lives being about prosperity? That is first and foremost what all of our goals should be. Now, I'm not going to stand up here and just point out flaws, especially, it's been discussed as to how these projects bring down property values, can increase crime, so on and so forth. But why don't we try a different solution? Instead of spending millions and millions of dollars on this new development, why don't we actually take this to where the urban developments already exist and develop and help them to prosper in their communities where they currently are, rather than moving them out here? Thank you.
Thank you.
Then we have,
Please, no applause.
then we have Beth Hunter, I don't believe has spoken before.
By the way, if you weren't aware, there is an adjacent room that I think is videoing this currently. So if you want to have private conversations, et cetera, you're able to go into that room and still continue to watch the proceedings and then come back in quietly. Thank you. That's fine.
Is she deferring her? Are you deferring
Yeah,
your
Beth,
time?
you want to be moved to the end, you said?
Good evening.
Good evening.
I have a handout that's going to be passed around, and I also have a slide or two that I'm going to put up on the screen, which is just a replication of what you're going to see in the handout. I'm asking your permission. I'm John Fermanis, by the way, and I'm a resident of 901 North Batavia Avenue. I'm a commercial resident, and I've been in that building for 16 years as a tenant. And at the end of last meeting, when I attended, Mr. Block read a letter from the mayor of Aurora. And that letter talked about how happy they were and pleased with the success of the Aurora St. Charles Living Center that was completed last year by Evergreen. I want to make a comparison between that project, which I took the time to drive to Aurora and look at the project up close and personal and talk to at least one of the tenants and walk completely around the building, saw where it was, and made a personal comparison, which you're going to see here. The first thing I want to do is look at what is similar between the two projects. And the first thing is they both will qualify for historic tax credits. But the Aurora property was a hospital and then became a nursing home. Very appropriate, and was built back in 1932, I believe. The Campana building was a factory, built as a factory, and has been converted into a warehouse and office space. Monday night, I attended the Batavia Historic Preservation Commission meeting, who is doing an unprecedented third meeting to discuss some of the historic modifications that are being made to this building. The second thing is low-income housing tax credits. Both projects get the tax credits. They're also qualified for the Aurora vouchers.
John, you have about 30 seconds.
Okay. As you can see, things that are different are you didn't need any zoning variances. It was a senior living center. There were no children to be involved. No sidewalks were required. There were no KDOT or IDOT changes required. No cell tower antenna because it was a hospital nursing home. It was never installed like the one on the Campana. No safety issues.
John,
No-
it's 3 minutes.
We finished? Okay,
Thank you, sir.
thank you.
Next is Bob McQuillan.
Please.
You didn't cut out Fox Valley, though.
If we have to clear the room, we'll clear the room.
Bob McQuillan.
Please.
We are going on repeat speakers now. This is Bob McQuillan, and after that is John Hunter.
Bob McQuillan has asked me to read his statement because he's out of town tonight. Is that okay with you?
That's fine. Hey, just so you know, there's a way to be brief in what you say, and I think that the previous speaker could have easily made his points within the 3-minute time slot. There's a lot of elaboration that's going into some of the comments being made. Let's be very specific about the issues and concerns that we have, and I think I won't have to be cutting people off. So thank you.
Bob McQuillan is out of town tonight, and he asked me to read his comments regarding a response to Evergreen's response last week on property
Excuse me,
taxes.
your name?
Sandra Ellis, 40 South Lincoln, Geneva.
Great, thank you.
I'm reading this now. My concern is that property taxes will increase due to the Campana development, and the real cost is to the Geneva School District. He evaluated the figures since that response. While the Evergreen representative provided numbers, his logic of not paying your own way is flawed. Geneva School District residents, with or without children, do pay their own way. When his children moved through the system, his neighbors helped with the cost of their education, and once their children had graduated, he paid for his neighbors' children. When and if Campana is developed, the property owners need to pay their way through property taxes. Properties are assessed at 1/3 of their market value, and taxes are based on the tax rate, which for Geneva School District is 5.36% of the assessed value. The market value of Campana will be $35 million, $5 million purchase and $30 million in build-out. And the assessed value will be $12 million. School taxes will come to $643,200 per year, or $7,444 per unit, based on the assessed value of $138,888. The developer needs to pay their way for the education these children will receive. The argument that the property has paid taxes for years and it's their turn to recoup the benefit doesn't hold water. Many companies have paid taxes for years without the benefit of the school system. Lastly, he wanted to allude to the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is the potential of a federal fair housing lawsuit or a lawsuit by Evergreen. At the previous meetings, an attorney from the FHA said that people have the First Amendment right to speak about not wanting, quote, those people, but it's against the law to act on that statement. The recent lawsuit against Kane County for $68 million is a prime example of what a no vote means. In this case, the developer did not get approval to develop the rehab center in Campton Hills and filed this lawsuit. Neither Batavia nor Geneva
You're under
wants-
30 seconds.
Okay, I'm under. Wants or can't afford a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. And I will stop at that point because the others go on a little bit too much, but thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Next is John Hunter.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the commission.
Good evening.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I hope that doesn't count towards my time. I have a couple of things that I wanted to just hand out, and while that's being passed on, here's the first packet. And then here is 10 copies of the other ones. I wanted to start with saying that we're still waiting for our questions to be answered from the previous meeting. I think that Mr. Black's PowerPoint presentation, which was more like another sales pitch, which we don't need to hear, didn't really address the number of questions we have. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get the number of copies that I would like, but I'd like to hand this over to the chairman, which enumerates all of the questions that we've had collectively that have yet to be answered. And I would like to find out, how are we going to do that? Obviously, the city doesn't want to do a straight question and answer format, but our questions have been clumped together and generalized and not really addressed individually like they deserve to be. So, having said that, the only other thing that I wanted to add is that I wanted to have I have some questions for the gentleman that represented T-Mobile, and it appears that he's not here. Is there any representative of T-Mobile or AT&T here? Because as I understand it, we have the right and capability of questioning someone who were to put forth testimony. And so I have some questions for him regarding the wireless communication facility, and I was just wondering how we can handle that. Should I ask you the questions? Should we wait for him to come back?
Well, you can ask the questions in the 3-minute time frame you have, and then if we can get responses, if they haven't been answered, then we'll try to do that.
Is there somebody here who's qualified to answer them?
I don't know.
Well, I'm
We'll ask
asking.
the applicant after the
Okay,
public
well,
testimony is given.
I'm asking to question the man who put forth the testimony at the last meeting, which oddly I couldn't find on the website. So, the question is, sir, could you please pull up the diagram of the...
You have under 20 seconds.
Okay, the cell tower shrouding. It looks as though to me that we're going to go from 16 antenna to 21 antenna, because with the shrouding now it will allow them to put antennas on the east face of the of the tower, which I think the shrouding is a bad idea. It throws off the proportions of the building, which were carefully
Time's up.
calculated.
Time's up.
10 more seconds, please.
No, thank you.
May I sign up to speak again after everybody's had their chance?
Possibly, yeah, you can certainly sign up again.
Well, because I really wasn't finished with my questions for the T-Mobile guy. And, clearly, sir, these are relevant questions that are not comments, they're not opinions. There's relevant questions at hand. So can I have the time to finish, or should I just sign up?
Submit the questions then, and then we'll consider them in
Okay.
deliberations.
The question was, has there ever been a study, one of the questions, has there ever been a study of anything outward of the Campana building? So for the antennas that are facing west into the Allendale neighborhood, has there been any studies done which would measure the exposure by those antennas? Secondly,
The exposure issue is an irrelevant issue because we do not have jurisdiction as a municipality regarding that. That is an FCC rule that is regulated by the Federal Communications Commission.
The Federal
Excuse me. That is regulated by the Federal Communications Commission. We do not have any jurisdiction over that, and we are preempted by federal law in regards to anything regarding to radio frequency radiation and cell antennas.
well, thank you for that, but the FCC is not a body that is concerned.
We're not addressing that
Very
tonight.
good. Okay.
At this
So
meeting.
the next one is that on those tower antennas, they look,
We're not addressing the antennas.
I'm sorry, sir, but the antennas are part of what you're considering here because you're moving the antennas to the rooftop. It's something that they're looking for a variance for.
Why don't you write your questions down and then submit them to us, and then we'll consider them in deliberations.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate your time.
Next, we have Beth Hunter again.
I'm Beth Hunter from Geneva. First of all, I would like to thank you for all the time that you have spent listening to testimony. We do appreciate the fact that you've been so gracious. Our list of questions is attached for everybody here. I do believe there is the feeling that our questions won't be answered, that they are being clumped together and we're not getting actual answers to pertinent questions. So we've consolidated them, and if you could just address them at some point, I would appreciate it. My only other request is that it seems overall, the overall concerns are safety matters. So is there any way that we could speak to the fire marshal or the police commissioner and actually have them do a question and answer to get some reassurance that this neighborhood will be addressed safely? I think that was pretty much all I have. I do have 2 cousins who live in Batavia. They have also written letters and have documents to submit, but there's only 1 copy of these documents. Can I just leave them with you? Okay. Thank you very much.
Next, we have Guy Prisco.
Thank you very much. My name is Guy Prisco. My wife and I reside at the Homestead, 700 West Fabian Parkway, apartment 3408. I believe that the following information obtained at this Monday's Historic Preservation meeting reinforced the contention that the Campana building is not suitable for human habitation. A sample of the glazing for the proposed first-floor windows on the east elevation of the building was presented and consisted of a film laminated between 2 panes of glass. The film was, through a photographic process, imprinted with a tinted brick pattern that attempted to match the existing brick. The visual transparency through the film was not demonstrated or shown. Suffice it to say that the transparency would be something less than an ordinary window glass. Based on the location shown on the existing wall, the top of the window would be about 36 inches above the floor, and there would be 4 2-foot by 4-foot windows per 16 feet width apartment. The eye level of an average person seated at a dining table will be about 45 inches from the floor, or about 9 inches above the top of the window. The insulating value, I'm just pointing out these observations to begin with, and then I'll add a little bit to it. The insulating value of the exterior wall, consisting of 4-inch glass block, which has an R value of about 1.96, and 4 windows with 1-inch insulating glass, which has an R value of about 3.06, would be a far cry from the current wall insulating standard of about R equal 1315. All of this is further convincing information that the proposed housing is not suitable for human habitation. The location of the windows cannot be considered to comply with any standard for the location of windows in habitable space in a living unit. Also, the construction of a berm with plantings a foot or 2 high,
Guy, you're at 30 seconds.
20 feet from the building to obscure the windows from the outside, also obscure the outside from the apartment unless one spends most of the time sitting on the floor. The location of inside bedrooms, with or without a loft, cannot comply with any standard for human habitation. The poorly insulated outer wall of each apartment represents at most 1/3 of the required R value for residential units today.
Time's up.
This, okay.
Thank you.
Next is Jennifer Beal.
Hi. I'm Jennifer Beal. I'm at 712 Forest Avenue in Geneva. I have a couple of questions. One of them pertains to a comment that Evergreen made during the presentation at the last meeting around the 3-hour and 25-minute mark about the crime statistics at the Buena Vista Apartments. That's their property in Elgin, which they did say was a fundamentally different property from Campana. But they stated that...
Excuse me, crime's been raised? Is there something specific?
Yes, actually, if you could give me another 10 seconds. My question is that if there is, Mr. Block said there was X number of arrests, 95 arrests over an 18-month period at Buena Vista, he would predict that that might translate to 7 to 22 arrests at Campana. And my question is, I'm not sure what the current arrest rates are now on the property, so would it be possible to have the police chief weigh in on whether or not his prediction is accurate and acceptable? That's my first question. The second question pertains to the new windows that the previous speaker was discussing. I have a background in chemistry, and I'm wondering about the brick facade that's being sprayed on. Evergreen's architect likened the windows themselves to looking through sunglasses, and that the spray on brick facade would be similar to what one would see on a city bus window. So my question is, what kind of chemical compound are you using to spray on the windows, and how does that hold up over time? Because I'm wondering about the maintenance of this, the laminate on there. Does it need to be reapplied every year? Can a guy just walk by and spray it on again, or do you have to take out the windows and reapply the brick facade in order to maintain the historical integrity of the building? Thanks.
Thank you.
Next we have Leanne Espinosa.
Thank you. As already established, the City of Batavia's comprehensive master plan calls for the city to consider land affected outside of your jurisdiction, and Evergreen's application narrative specified that they would provide a graceful transition from the commercial property to the surrounding low-density housing. Three of my concerns seem to be of lower priority for the group, and rightfully so. There are bigger major safety concerns at hand, but I have some others that are typically normally considered in a development like this, including the parking lot. There are 3 light poles that are adjacent to the back of mine and neighboring properties. These poles will be on all night, and depending on the height of them, they will be seen from my 3 young daughters' windows all night long. The noise from the parking and recreational areas, in addition to the commercial uses that can be ever-changing in the traffic and volume without further approval required. And the aesthetics, our backyard currently is extremely tranquil, natural, active, wild habitat, like the beautiful Fabian Park across 31. City of Batavia's multifamily design guidelines state that the goal of improving the quality of community multifamily developments is to mitigate the impacts often associated. It goes on to state that the multifamily residential developments need to respect the scale and character of adjacent residential neighborhoods through the attention of numerous things, including noise, lighting, mitigation, and landscape buffering, and to do so with the quality of materials that will physically endure the long term. I have a couple of points that go on to specify. In the context and compatibility, section number 5 recommends that the perimeter walls have softening landscape. And number 6 says that design characteristics should be in context with the surrounding neighborhood and unify the development. Number 8 says to orient the views to nearby private yards so that it's minimal, and when they do occur, they ensure that they are indirect. Number 9 says to locate the components of the development that generate noise, such as active recreational areas, trash enclosures, maintenance buildings, so that they will not disturb adjacent uses. Number 11, minimize the negative effects of noise. The materials that absorb and deflect sounds generated by the adjacent uses. Masonry walls are an example of that. Open space and common areas exclusive of parking are a priority for the city design guidelines, and yet additional, albeit needed parking is being considered in lieu of the soccer field and tot lot. It's a priority for a number of reasons, including drainage, which would have a significant impact on the quality of our properties and property values. However, adding the additional parking would create even more obstructive lighting, which needs to be considered. Building relationship and location, section number 6 calls for buffering of the active site amenities. Landscaping section states that it's critical to protect the naturalized stormwater management and to provide screening and buffering. There's a screen wall section that talks about serving and hiding the unsightly parts of the project from the residential views, and that are generally used to screen utilities, parking, and storage areas. Masonry, a minimum of 8 inches wide. Prefab walls are not. Prefab walls and chain link fences are prohibited. There's quality that it talks about. It talks about the coloring and texturing in the other sections, and all of those other things that are normally talked about in a development. And my point is that lighting, noise, aesthetic of our properties stand to be invaded. And
Thank you.
I just ask that you consider that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next is Sandra Ellis. No. Then we have Gary Honeyman.
Gary Honeyman from Batavia, and I just have one concern, and that's the traffic safety. I just don't understand how...
We've already discussed traffic many times over.
I was out of state on the...
But I'm letting you know it was discussed many times over, and we're fully aware of the
Can I have a
concerns.
half a minute?
Well, we don't want repeat comments. If you feel there's a concern with traffic safety, just state that and then move on.
All right. I find it unbelievable you'd even consider a project like this when you make a very dangerous intersection more dangerous because of more cars.
Thank you.
And then we have Joseph Keeper.
Hello, Joseph Kiefer, 1740 Pheasant Run Place in Geneva. I'm going to run a clinic on efficient speaking, so I'll be brief. All right, a few points. I just want to reference my previous questions at the last hearing and respectfully disagree that they're not relevant because I believe the veracity of the applicant is paramount in deciding whether to grant these variances or approve the project. So I'm still hoping that those questions can be answered. Second, I sent along an email to Mr. Strassman yesterday, I think was distributed to you guys earlier today with the packet. And it references comments that Mr. Block made on August 16th when he said, and I quote, during the Historic Preservation Commission meeting, we actually did have Anthony Rubano up from Springfield. In short, Mr. Block said, we just can't accommodate new sidewalks and maintain the historic integrity of what this element is in the history of the building. On Monday, I spoke with Anthony Rubano, and he informed me, in regards to the sidewalk around the East Lawn parking lot, that was never proposed. So I'm asking for somebody to verify what Mr. Rubano said to me, which should be pretty easy. And let's get a sidewalk along the East Long parking lot, okay? That was from the applicant to you, and that was what I see as a misstatement at best. The last thing I want to bring up, which has not been brought up yet, that is I'd like to hear from the fire chief from the city of Batavia or the designated fire marshal to discuss all aspects of this project. I think it's important to do it now. There's a couple of different commissions going on. This is one of them. The Historic Preservation Commission is the other. And I'd like to know about truck entrances, the ability for the trucks to go in and out of the site, the roadway accommodations around the site. I'd also like to know the impact of the businesses that are inside of Campana, to include the effect by the mattress mattress store. Any other recommendations that the fire chief or his designee would like to see? And in particular, I think it's really important because, as you've already heard.
30 seconds.
Perfect. I think we've already heard that the subsill windows are being discussed during the Historic Commission meetings. And I'd like to hear what the fire chief has to say about that, because I believe the architect said that they're going to be similar to safety glass, which is great if you want to prevent somebody from falling out, but if you need to get somebody out, that could be a problem. And the last thing I want to say is, while they've been described as being up to code, the code is for a skyscraper. That's not a skyscraper. So I just want to hear from the fire chief, and thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, list.
Okay, so those are all the speakers. I thought those were all the speakers. I guess we have another list. Apologize for that.
Matt Brown.
I'll go really fast. Just for clarification, I submitted a list of questions in advance that were included in the packet. Will those be answered at some point in time? If so, I'll just skip over all of those. And
You submitted a list of questions at the beginning of what, this meeting?
No. Through Mr. Strassman in advance of the meeting, that was part of the packet that were questions for both the applicant and the city. I just want to make, I did that in advance, obviously, to keep it to 3 minutes, and I don't want to recap if I don't have to. But without figuring it out, I'll do my best to stick to 3 minutes as fast as I can. And this is all new information or in response to either responses from the applicant or comments made by city staff as part of the memos. In response to the existing entrances being adequate in terms of serving the site, in the PM peak, both the entrance at Camp onto Fabian is at a level of service F, and meanwhile the north leg at Illinois 31 approaching the Illinois 31 Fabian entrance is a level of service F as well. That's based on the applicant's traffic modeling. So I don't see how shifting the traffic necessarily from one entrance to the other during the peak solves anything. A restaurant was mentioned as being a use that Evergreen is interested in using at the mattress store in the future. I would like to know, we've heard a lot about projecting traffic. I would like to know what the restaurant would project in terms of use moving forward. I sent an exhibit which shows auto turn for a fire truck, and if it's heading westbound on Fabian and trying to make a right turn and use the connector road, which is a new movement, I understand it doesn't exist right now, but the connector road, it will. It overlaps with any waiting vehicles, which was a concern by KDOT because of the proximity of the throat, and then also overlaps with the mattress store parking. So I'm very concerned about that movement. I think it's a definite issue that needs to be figured out before the approval of the site plan, and we have this connector road that doesn't exist. And then in summary, at the last meeting, there was a lot of talk of what the Kane County Stormwater Ordinance says and what Illinois drainage law says. And so I went in last week and talked to Kane County Stormwater to get some clarification. Some of the things that I heard said didn't sound like what I've heard in the past in terms of engineering projects. There was the discussion of the 25,000 square foot net.
About 15 seconds.
Of new impervious is what triggers detention. That's not the case. It's any additional rise in downstream runoff, which obviously this project increases impervious area substantially. They noted that with this project, they would be reaching out to Batavia to talk about it and work through some of the detention issues, because in their mind, stormwater detention was needed on this project. So just something I wanted to get out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Jamie Tate.
In the middle of this, tonight's thing. I mean, you can have mine.
Good evening. Thanks for letting me speak again. I just wanted to mention there's a lot of reliance on the comp plan tonight, so I actually have some questions for city staff and for the plan commission. If you could let everybody know what the comp plan process was, who was involved in it, for these decisions that were made for this to be necessarily zone mixed use and to be such reliance on the comp plan in this case. How much public participation was involved? Did you have as many people in the room that you see back here today? I think all that can make a difference as far as, what goals and such were put in the comp plans. As far as it being zone mixed use, the comp plan says mixed use, but how is that decision made? Everybody keeps talking about how residential doesn't fit here. Maybe the comp plan's wrong. Maybe residential doesn't fit here. If you have so many people in this room that are telling you that. So I think if you could kind of let us know what that process was, how many people were involved, who really made that decision about who it should be mixed use right here, that would really help out. That's my question for the
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next, we have Emily Erickson.
All right, I'm going to summarize as quickly as possible. I'll hand you guys all my detailed comments right after. My first one has to do with, on page 2 of the City of Batavia staff draft findings for approval and review of the conditional fines. Question number 2 and 3 relate to the evidence that property values will be diminished by approval of the plan development overlay. The staff answered question 2 and 3 by saying that no specific evidence was provided at the public hearing to suggest that the value of the subject property or other properties would be diminished. That statement is incorrect. If you visit the City of Batavia's website dedicated to the Campana updates and click, I'll let you guys read the details, it shows that we actually did submit a report, and it was published, the Sanford Business Report Journal, and it speaks directly to the impacts of the property value. I won't go through, I think everybody knows it. Basically, it says in our area, medium incomes above $54,000, housing prices declined, yada, yada, yada. So I asked the City of Batavia staff draft findings for approval and review of the conditions zoning code review of specific conditions finding 2 and 3 to be reevaluated in light of the fact that this evidence was entered into the record and it was not taken into consideration. My second comment is that on page 3 of the city's staff findings, under the design review, question number 1, it states that the multifamily design guidelines are intended to apply to non-mixed use sites that are residential only and only where new buildings are proposed. The result of this conclusion means that the Campana redevelopment of multifamily residence located in mixed use zoning areas will not have to comply to the city of Batavia's multifamily design guidelines. The residents of the Campana building and the surrounding neighborhoods could greatly benefit from the adherence of these guidelines. I asked the City of Batavia to provide documentation and demonstrate that the multifamily design guidelines were intended to apply to only non-mixed use multifamily resident sites and not apply to Campana. On one hand, the City of Batavia is relying on the parking zone requirements that are stated specifically for multifamily residents located in mixed use. I know this is a lot. So it's basically relying on categorizing this project as multifamily residents in some aspects and not in others. The City of Batavia is demonstrating an inconsistent application of city requirements. Is the evidence of this intent that the parking zoning requirements for multifamily residents were intended to apply to mixed-use multifamily residential? This is a question that must be answered. Also, there's no mention of the multifamily design guidelines that state that the guidelines apply only to new construction. So I asked the City of Batavia to further clarify how it applied the multifamily residential requirements from one part of the city's building requirements, but not from the other. And then my last is really brief. Basically, Evergreen stated that in documents submitted to IDA that for the low-income housing tax credits, there be have garden plots. So I'd like Evergreen to answer if they intend to follow through with the garden plots that they stated in their scored application to IDA for the tax credits. And then you guys can take all this.
Thank you.
Next, we have Jenna Dempsey.
Hello. I'm going to be using my time to read a letter from Gunther Lubin, who spoke at the previous meeting. He unfortunately can't be here tonight, and he had a follow-up point that he needed to share for public record. So as a follow-up point I raised, speaking as Gunther at this point, on August 16th, I completed additional research regarding Campana's estimated future real estate tax obligations. After completing this exercise, it's clear the developer did not complete proper due diligence in calculating its estimated future tax burden. In fact, Evergreen Development is referencing a cost that is nearly 94% below the assessor's estimate. The developer's stated current taxes for the Campana building are around $96,000, and they estimate future real estate tax burden to increase by $50,000 to around $146,000. At the last meeting, I provided comments questioning this statement, as that amount seemed low. Knowing this future operating cost is crucial for the public and the committee to responsibly review, and for the developer to confirm their financial model, I met with the Geneva Township Assessor, the taxing authority for the Campana project. After discussing this project with township staff, their preliminary estimate for Campana's future real estate tax obligation is approximately $283,000 per year, or $137,000 more per year than what the developer stated. The assessor's calculation is based on anticipated income, which was provided to the City of Batavia by the developer. When the commercial space component is backed out, estimated by the assessor at $31,500 per year, the 80 residential units will need to cover $251,600 per year, or $3,145 per unit in real estate taxes. When comparing this updated cost estimate to the one the developer provided this committee, it equates to an average additional $142 per month per unit each resident will need to pay to cover the required real estate tax burden. In conclusion, if the developer is incorrect by this amount on a simple tax forecast estimate, which only required someone on the Evergreen Development team to meet with the local assessor, it should concern all of us. What other areas may they be off on as well? This significant error questions whether this developer should go back to IDA and amend their general application for tax credits for this project. This mistake could impact the project's stability and may substantially raise rents to cover the required future real estate tax obligations, which may not be attainable. I have a copy.
30 seconds.
I have a copy of Mr. Lubin's letter, and I also am including photographs of pedestrian traffic across Fabian Bridge that I addressed in the August 2nd meeting. I believe Mr. Block referred to that as an anecdote. Excuse me. And I just want to make sure that we have it on public record. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else that hasn't spoken? Okay, if not, or if there's no one else to speak, we'll go into staff report.
I signed the list. My name was there, I don't know where the list went.
Why don't you come forward?
I may not be alone.
I say if anybody's come in and hasn't spoken, certainly you can come forward.
Anyone hasn't spoken, they should be ahead of me. I
Yeah.
signed up last time and
Oh, that's fine.
just don't want to do the wrong thing.
No, you're fine.
I'll mark them down.
Don't start my clock until I pass these out, please.
What was your name again?
What's your name?
Robert Burns, 2000 South Batavia Avenue, Geneva. I have 3 things I'm passing out. I think I have 9 of these to pass out.
This is for Tom.
I meant for the commissioners and whatever others you think appropriate. I'm going to wait till everybody has them. I've done this for a living. No point in talking when you're not receiving it or reading it.
There's one of you.
There's 3 different items, all single pages. There's a letter, and then there's a mission statement from IDOT and a mission statement from KDOT.
Okay, go ahead.
Good. In yellow, you will notice that I've highlighted on both the 2 mission statements from IDOT and KDOT. The very first words that show up are safe and safety on each. They're here to protect us. Safety. The letter was submitted by my partner, Jeff Roloff, August 15th to Mr. Strassman. It was supposed to be distributed at the last meeting. We have no evidence that it was. It did not show up in a packet. It did not show up in tonight's packet. For all we know, it's never made the light of day. Jeff is not here. He lives on the East Coast. He's very active, very smart. Feels like he's not being listened to. I hope that's wrong, but we have no way of knowing he isn't. That's very disturbing. We also have reason to believe this is not the only letter that's been submitted to this group that hasn't made the light of day either. That's extremely disturbing. Lastly, I'm going to move on to some mathematics. Hope you can follow these numbers. In the traffic studies that have been done, they ignore certain things. So this is new information. The volleyball court training situation has 60 girls in a session at the volleyball facility. This is on multiple nights per week. There are 3 sessions per night. That's 180 girls per night that are in that building. Think about how it would work. These are girls. Some of them are in grammar school. Mom drops off Mary, can't stay. There's nowhere to stay. She goes and runs some errands and she comes back. That's 2 trips, right? That's 4 trips. She goes in, she goes out, runs her errand, goes in and comes out. There are 180 girls per night, every night, when they're in season, which is about 8 months of the season. According to my math, that's 180 girls times 4 trips. That's 720 trips per day that go in and out of there that the developer's traffic study didn't seem fit to think was worth measuring. I am absolutely mystified about that. Secondly, ProForce runs many of you may be clients there, a very great health training facility. They have told me as recently as today, they have 5 classes every morning, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 a.m., 15 people per class. That's 75 in the morning. They have 5 more in the afternoon at an average of 10 per class. That adds up to 75
Under
plus
30 seconds.
125, I think I can get there, times 2 trips in and out, because these are adults who don't have to be dropped off. So that's 250 for ProForce. It's 720 for the Fusion Volleyball. 970 trips a day, okay, that these traffic studies didn't see fit to include. Now, KLOA did a traffic study, and what did they say? They say we totally disagree with that. except Mr. Strassman writes up in his write-up that he says they do agree. So they didn't agree. They wrote another letter back to Strassman, and he doesn't choose to put it in the packet either time. I find this ridiculous. And by the way, thank you for putting up with this, but the need to talk in this fashion, I don't know what's forcing this. I suspect it's not the members of this commission, but I find it to be really ridiculous. Okay, thank you very much.
What are they doing here?
Okay, that concludes the public testimony. I think we'll go ahead and have a staff report before we close the public hearing, in case there's any follow-up.
As staff has mentioned in at the previous hearing, that we do continue to be supportive of this proposal. The hearing is essentially concluded, and we continue to be supportive of this. After the commission is determined, it has all the information needed to deliberate the matters. The commission should close the hearing and deliberate in the open meeting. When the commission is prepared to take action on the plan development or design review, the commission must first have arrived at findings for each. Staff did provide a draft of the findings that the commission may use as a beginning point in arriving at its own findings. Action on the plat of subdivision does not require findings. For the plan development, staff recommends the commission recommends city council approval of the zoning map amendment for the plan development overlay with modifications to the requirements of the zoning code, which I will list, and with conditions, which I will read. The commission may amend or remove any of the conditions that staff will list, or the commission may add conditions. The modifications to the zoning code with the plan development overlay are the following. One, a modification to zoning code table 2.504. This is regarding minimum parking setback from streets to allow less than the required 10-foot setback for the existing parking spaces in the south parking lot to accommodate the dedication of right-of-way for Fabian Parkway as required by KDOT. Modification number 2 to zoning code section 2.505.A. This is regarding a land use mix to allow approximately 18% of the first floor space in the existing building adjacent to streets to be used for residential, entertainment, or drinking land uses rather than the required 25%. Modification 3 to zoning code section 2.505.B. This is regarding transparency on the building to allow less than the required amount of vision glass on walls of the exterior building facing public streets, in accordance with the Historic Preservation Commission's action on the application for certificate of appropriateness for the building elevations. Facing Batavia Avenue, no vision glass extending from 2 feet above grade to 7 feet above grade need be provided for the commercial area, where approximately 72 feet or is not provided, where approximately 72 feet in width would be required, and no vision glass would need to be provided. That again is for the modification, where approximately 142 feet in width of vision glass would be required for the residential area above the first floor. Facing Fabian Parkway, no vision glass need be provided, again for the modification. For the second floor, where approximately 34 feet in width of vision glass would be required. For the fourth modification, this would be the zoning code section 2.505.C. This is regarding building entrances to allow less than the required number of entrances facing public streets in accordance with the Historic Preservations Commission on the Commission's action on the application for certificate of appropriateness for the building facades. Facing Batavia Avenue, 3 entrances are provided where 13 would be required, and facing Fabian Parkway, 1 entrance is provided where 2 would be required. Modification number 5 is for zoning code section 2.505.E. This is regarding parking field landscaping separation. This would be to allow more than 20 spaces without requiring installation of 20-foot landscapes separation. Modification number 6 is to zoning code sections 3.203.A and C. This is regarding parking setback and landscaping in the arterial setback overlay district to accommodate the existing conditions in the south parking area. That would be less than a 50-foot parking setback and lack of landscaping, which would result from dedication of right-of-way for Fabian Parkway as required by KDOT. Modification number 7 is from zoning code table 4.204. This is regarding parking supply to allow approximately 206 parking spaces to be constructed and striped on the subject property before occupancy of any of the residences, provided land sufficient to construct and stripe additional parking spaces on the subject property be land banked by Evergreen Real Estate Group, consistent with the site plan already submitted to the city, which would provide a total of 301 parking spaces on the subject property. Modification number 8 is to zoning code section 4.303.S.1. This is regarding monument sign landscaping to waive the required landscaping for the sign to be erected on the Batavia Avenue frontage and to allow less than the required landscaping for the sign to be erected on the Fabian Parkway frontage. Modification number 9 to zoning code section 4.407.B.2.A, parentheses 4, Romanet II, regarding the Fabian Parkway monument sign setback to allow the sign to be set back less than the required 10 feet from a right-of-way or private street. Modification number 10 to zoning code section 4.704.C.1 regarding the building being a wireless communication facility support structure to allow the existing wireless communications facilities as described in Evergreen Real Estate Group's application for approval of plan development overlay to remain on the subject property in accordance with an approved certificate of appropriateness for the building elevations. Also, staff recommends the following conditions be applied to the recommendation for the plan development overlay. Condition number 1, site improvements shall be in substantial conformance with the set of plans submitted by Evergreen Real Estate Group dated June 30th, 2017, with a limit of 80 dwelling units. Condition number 2, approval of the plan development overlay is granted to Evergreen Real Estate Group and substantially related entities and is not transferable without prior approval of the City Council. Condition number 3, approval of a certificate of appropriateness for the subject property. Condition number 4, dedication of right-of-way for Fabian Parkway as required by KDOT. Number 5, dedication of right-of-way for Batavia Avenue, Illinois 31, if required by KDOT. Condition number 6, Evergreen shall use its best efforts to provide transportation for grade school children residing on the subject property to and from Western Avenue School for classes and school special events where feasible. Such transportation is to be coordinated between Geneva School District 304 and Evergreen unless waived in writing by the school district. Number 7, construction of a sidewalk along the Fabian Parkway frontage of the subject property, subject to approval by KDOT. Number 8, installation of a north-south pedestrian crosswalk at the intersection of Fabian Parkway and Batavia Avenue, Illinois 31, with pedestrian crossing signals per the plans submitted to the city by Evergreen and approval by KDOT. Number 9, periodic review of parking adequacy on the subject property by city staff, and further prompt construction and striping by Evergreen of additional parking spaces upon determination by city staff of the need for additional parking per the land bank parking plan. The city's review will include but not be limited to review of non-residential tenants on the subject property. Number 10, waiver of objection by Evergreen to proposal and establishment of a backup special service area for the territory comprising the subject property for the purpose of funding construction of additional parking facilities and associated improvements to comply with applicable city codes, including but not necessarily limited to stormwater management, per the land bank parking areas designated on Evergreen's plans, and after determination by city staff that such parking spaces are needed to serve the residents and commercial occupants on the subject property. Number 11, approval by city staff of final site engineering plans to be submitted by Evergreen to staff as part of the building permit process. Condition number 12, approval by city staff of signed site sign, site, and landscaping plan for a monument sign proposed for the Fabian Parkway frontage of the subject property to be submitted by Evergreen at the time of building permit submittals, including but not limited to review for aesthetic and safety purposes of visibility issues and the adequacy of the landscaping. Number 13, approval by city staff of added tree species diversity to avoid monoculture tree areas. Number 14, no gaming licenses shall be permitted or issued for the subject property. Number 15, relocation of existing wireless communication facilities on the building to the top of the existing building and construction of a screening enclosure approved by city staff and the certificate of appropriateness. Number 16, land cash contributions per the city's subdivision regulations. Staff also has a recommendation regarding design review. Staff recommends the commission approve the design review in substantial conformance with the set of plans submitted by Evergreen dated June 30th, 2017, subject to the conditions which I will list. Again, as with the Plan Development Commission conditions, the commission may amend or remove any of these conditions or add conditions if it deems needed. Condition number 1, City Council approval of the application for a zoning map amendment for Plan Development Overlay District for the subject property, including changes to site plans per City Council approval. Number 2, approval of a certificate of appropriateness for the subject property. Condition number 3, the modifications to the zoning code requirements as listed in the amendment to the zoning map for Plan Development Overlay District for the subject property. Those were listed in the staff memorandum to the commission. Number 4, conditions of approval recommended by staff for approval of the amendment to the zoning map for the Plan Development Overlay District for the subject property. And finally, regarding the preliminary and final plat of subdivision, staff recommends the commission recommend approval of the plat of subdivision subject to the following conditions, which I will list. And again, the commission may amend or remove any of these conditions.
Your 3 minutes is up.
If it deems needed. 1, revisions to the plat to be approved by city staff to accommodate dedication of right-of-way as required by KDOT and IDOT. Number 2, adding access utility, cross-access and drainage easements per city staff approval. Number 3, the conditions of approval recommended by staff for approval of the amendment to the zoning map for the Plan Development Overlay District for the property. And number 4, a statement added to the plat stating that each subdivided parcel of the subject property remain in unified ownership by a single entity or between substantially related entities at all times.
Thank you. Okay, and our legal representation, Mr. Schuster has some comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In regard to the matter before you, there are certain givens that are on the table. I just wanted to remind you. By all means. This is property that's currently classified in the city's MU mixed-use zoning district. That means the city council has previously made a determination that this property should be improved with a mix of uses as allowed by those regulations for the mixed-use zoning district, including multifamily residential uses. There's a list of various commercial uses, and there's even some institutional uses that are included. The property in question is improved with the building, which has been registered on the National Registry of Historic Places, and it is subject to the jurisdiction of the State Historical Preservation Office of the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. The city has in place certain zoning regulations which allow for a planned development overlay district to be added onto any property in the city as a zoning map amendment. So this applicant is seeking a zoning map amendment to add a planned development overlay district for the existing MU mixed-use zoning on the subject property. Map amendments are subject to certain standards under both state law and the city's zoning regulations. They're very similar, and you have before you a list of those standards for your guidance. There are certain stated purposes and uses for a planned development overlay district in the city code. You have before you a list of those purposes and uses for that district. There are certain regulations which govern the underlying MU mixed-use zoning district. You have before you a copy of those regulations. So you are then to discuss the matter at hand, the petition for zoning amendment. and try to arrive at a recommendation to the city council in regard to that application. In doing so, one of the things you must do is make written findings. Staff has drafted findings for your guidance to identify the points that should be hit with those findings. There are 10 modifications to the applicable zoning regulations which have been requested by the petitioner, and those are outlined in the draft findings for your discussion. You may add to, subtract from, you can edit, modify, or change that draft any way you see fit. It's simply a guide for your discussion. In regard to the planned development overlay zoning district, you have the authority to recommend that certain conditions be imposed for any approval. Staff has identified 16 conditions, which you just heard read to you, which could be applied to the planned development overlay in this case. You should consider those. You may add to, subtract from, edit, change, or modify those listed conditions before concluding your work on the matter. You also have before you the approval of the design review that's proposed for the subject property. There are separate findings in your package to address the factors which go into that decision. And finally, there's a proposal to subdivide the subject property into 2 separate parcels. So there's a preliminary plat of subdivision. Your approval is required for that, and your approval is then forwarded to the city council for its approval. Now, in addition to all of that, there are 2 federal laws which bear on the decisions before you. The first is limited to the telecommunications facilities. Federal law states that no local governmental agency may regulate the placement of telecommunications facilities on the basis of environmental effects of radio frequency emissions. There are lots of people that quarrel with that, but that is the current status of the federal law that applies. A broader rule would prohibit consideration of any discriminatory factor in regard to the placement of residential structures in a local area. Where the local zoning code allows multifamily housing, it may not be precluded on the basis of any discriminatory factor. So, in your deliberations now, you should consider a multitude of things. There's information contained in the original petition. There's been information, factual information that's been added to the record throughout the course of this public hearing, including written statements and other materials that have been submitted. There are expert reports and comments from both the applicant and from some members of the public. You have before you the purposes of the Planned Development Overlay District, the standards for a zoning map amendment, the requested modifications, and the suggested conditions. I suggest to you that you should look for the facts in all of this. You should be wary of comments or opinions that are based on assumption or preconception. But in any event, you need to weigh everything that you've heard for these 3 nights of a public hearing and come to some conclusion. That conclusion would be then by a motion and second to recommend or not recommend to the city council, and subject to whatever findings, modifications, or conditions you decide, approval or disapproval of the petition for zoning map amendment and the plat of subdivision. For everyone here, it's already been stated, the Plan Commission recommendation would then be forwarded to the City Council, and that matter will come up with before the council at a future date to be determined. The City Council makes the final decision on the zoning map amendment and the plat of subdivision, and depends on your input from the Plan Commission before making that decision. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Schuster and our purpose here tonight? Okay, if not, I understand, Mr. Block, you wanted to make some statement?
Yes, thank you. Just very briefly, because we've been at this for, 15 hours or so. I'll be very brief. So we have been hearing an awful lot of information about a lot of different topics here, and I don't want to belabor that. I wanted to show you one more picture, and this was a picture that we showed to the Historic Preservation Commission on Monday night. That group had specifically asked for a rendering of the project, and so we think that that rendering kind of nicely represents what it is that we're trying to do with this project, and to really bring back this building to some of its historic splendor. So you can see some of the relationships, the screen at the top of the tower, the way the historic lighting of the gallery spaces on the second and third floor will be restored, the fact that the landscaping and the landscaping approach that we've taken at the base of the building will be using landscaping tools to conceal the new windows, which, as we've discussed, are required and a necessary part of making this building suitable for residential use, and the approach of the parking at the Great Oval at the front, and a modest amount of site lighting there. We're not going to belabor those design issues. I wanted to come back to you because some of you may have participated in, or at least watched, the Committee of the Whole meeting that kicked off this whole process on May 2nd. But I wanted to return to the arguments that we made to the Committee of the Whole on May 2nd and sort of put that as the context of why we're doing this project. We asked, what is the building's economic potential at that point? The current approach to the building and the current owners are doing what they can with a very challenging structure, but it can't provide a long-term solution for this building. Our full construction program for this building is about $20 million. The total cost of the project is about $30 million. So I made some financial assumptions. Let's back out 20%. Let's say that this is a private market approach to this building, and that the private market is going to try to do something with this building. Private market doesn't have to pay Davis-Bacon wages. They can pay less wages through a contractor that doesn't have those requirements that are federally driven. So let's say 20% of that comes out, and we have other standards we have to meet. So let's say the construction cost is only really $16 million. You add to that $10 million for the acquisition. You have to pay the attorneys and accountants and architects, financing and title costs and all that. So let's say the total program is actually about $4 million less than ours. Let's say it's only $26 million. Right now, if you were to assume an 80-unit program that's all market rate, that's not using the kinds of tools that we're using, the net operating income on this property would be about $900,000 in the first year. So if you look at current interest rates, that income stream can support about $10.5 million in private first mortgage debt, plus about another $3.5 million in federal equity through the sale of low-income housing tax credits. So you add those together, and that's $14 million. Well, you still have to get to $26 million. So you need to put in $12 million of developer equity in order to make this project succeed financially. Our approach replaces this with nearly $20 million in tax credit-driven equity and debt from the subsidy sources that a typical market developer doesn't have access to. So if you look at that $12 million developer equity, the best case return on that equity is about 5.7% cash on cash, or a 3% internal rate of return. No real estate investor will accept those returns. Those returns are insufficient for any real estate investor who is working in the market today. And as I mentioned at the Committee of the Whole meeting, if the market had a solution for this building, of the three solutions that were previously offered, the medical facility picking up the building and moving in and building some new stuff behind it, or the charter school that was previously mentioned, the market would have delivered that solution already. So what do you do with a complex historic preservation challenge where the market can't provide a solution? We're using tax credits. We're using the historic tax credits. We're using the housing tax credits. We're using the Illinois affordable housing tax credits. And we're using other supporting financial programs through King County's allocation of federal dollars and through the Federal Home Loan Bank program. Together, all of these tools can help achieve this project's objective. The proposed redevelopment of the site addresses the significant $20 million capital needs using economic tools beyond those which a typical market-based solution could provide. It's restoring this building, rehabilitating the building to the Secretary of the Interior standards for historic preservation. It's making this building, in some ways, look almost like it looked when it was built in 1937. It's bringing new mixed-income housing to a community where nearly all of the speakers have acknowledged the need for housing for folks at a range of incomes. Its parking solution has even been accepted as adequate by the opposing consultants. And the remaining requested modifications that Joel has listed in his report are modest, and they're only as needed for the project. And finally, the team that I lead here has a track record of success at this type of complex, multi-layered project. We ask you for your support. We ask you for your consideration for this project. We think this will be a wonderful project for the entire Fox River Valley, and we thank you for all the time and energy you've put into this.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I think I will entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
I will so move.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 So public hearing is closed. Great, thank you very much, appreciate it. Okay, so just so the people in the audience understand, we're going to go into deliberations. There's going to be some in-depth discussion. So hopefully we could get through it tonight, but I'm not quite so sure of that. We might get through portions of it and not all. There will be another opportunity, since we are a recommending body, when it comes before the City Council, for you to voice your concerns. There's been a lot of significant input on both sides, pro and con, and we appreciate everybody coming forward and speaking on the topic. So with that in mind, going forward, just want to open it to discussion amongst the commissioners, questions related to the staff report, questions of the applicant, related to the zoning change.
Just to the zoning change?
Well, I think we want to address one issue at a time. It doesn't mean you can't ask questions that would relate to the design review, because I think they overlap.
I have two questions. One is, in some of the paper that we received, there was mention of retail. And I would like a clarification on that as far as what kind of retail we're talking about. Is it just the mattress shop, or is it more than that inside the Campana building? And the other question was that sidewalk on Fabian Parkway going to Allen Drive from the project. I know that's been talked about, but I recall that they said that that wasn't going to be permitted by either IDOT or KDOT. So I'd like some clarification on that too.
I'm happy to speak to those. So the retail that's proposed right now is that the mattress store will be remaining. The mattress store maintains a storefront on Fabian Parkway, and then they use the rest of their space more for storage. The other uses that are in the west wing of the property, including the Pro Force and the volleyball, those are not retail. They're a different kind of commercial use. So really the only retail is the mattress store that's proposed on Fabian. Or it is currently existing on Fabian. And as far as the sidewalk west to Allen Drive, we did have the discussion with KDOT. They have indicated preliminary support for that. We're willing to work with KDOT to get that done. The challenge is that the sidewalk would be built in right-of-way that they control, but it would effectively be going across the front yards of some of the homeowners between the medical office property and Allen Drive. And, clearly there are people who are already unhappy with this project. Our goal is not to make the neighbors unhappy, even though I think we failed at that objective. But So we, again, we're happy to work with KDOT and the city of Batavia to get that done if that is an objective.
I believe there's no connecting sidewalk in the
That's correct.
adjoining neighborhood, so it wouldn't go anywhere at this point.
That's right.
If I may, we had a conversation with the Geneva Township Highway Commissioner, and he indicated that he was not favorable to the sidewalk being extended along Allen Drive, which is actually a township road. So we did ask that question, and they said that they were not interested in having with that there.
How do the grade school children that go to Western School get to school that live on Allen Lane or Allen Drive and the other streets that are around there? Do you know how they get to school?
In the single-family homes that are there now?
The grade schools.
That I don't know. I'm not sure how the children get to school
Because if
now.
they don't have sidewalks there, if the kids walk or ride their bikes,
one would assume.
Typically, if you have a situation where there's a hazard zone where they don't have sidewalks, a lot of times those are considered busing areas. I don't know if that's the case here, but that's oftentimes what happens.
can we find that out if that area is bused?
No, we're not going to get into public debate, so I'm sorry, the public hearing was closed. We'll address the questions and answers at this table. Thank you.
I mean, I know that not all kids are going to ride the bus. I mean, that's obvious from Batavia kids
Right.
now. They don't ride the bus. But, so if they're going to be walking or riding their bikes, they do need something to go from the Campana building to Allen Drive, if that's the way to Western Avenue, school.
Yeah, right now, if they did not have a continuous sidewalk, I believe that would be considered a hazardous transportation situation, and they would actually provide transportation because of that.
And, well, that's what the van is about, right?
Right, yes.
But are all kids going to use that? I know.
So I can briefly address the thought on the van. We can't force our tenants to use our van. Our approach that we will take with the tenants is that we will include a school transportation rider in the lease that we have each of our residential tenants sign that spells out exactly how the van will be offered and say the school start time is this, the school end time is this. We will offer transportation at those times. The bus leaves at 8 o'clock sharp or whatever the time is, and on a as requested basis, as available basis, we will also make our staff available to drive that van to pick up kids at an after-school program or a before-school program. That really depends on the interests of the individual tenants who are there.
Okay. I see. Thank you.
Bill?
I have a couple questions. One regarding parking. With the lower amount of spaces proposed, is there going to be consideration as to like specific designation for commercial versus residential priority or for visitors? And then the strategy if we do get to a point where parking is overflowing, the interim strategy before land banking is put into place.
So the intention right now is because the primary residential entrance is off of Route 31 and more of the commercial uses are off of Fabian Parkway, the idea is that the residential parking will be primarily situated in the front in the oval there, and the commercial parking will be more in the back of the property on the west side. In many of our properties, we do not have a need to assign individual parking spaces. Typically, there is enough parking for our tenants. However, if we get into a situation where we do see that there is a need and there are concerns and complaints, one of our first steps will be to assign individual parking spaces. We can number them. And so when tenants sign a lease, they'll say, okay, you're in parking space number 13, and your space is over here, and that parking space will be registered with a tow contract. We will have a towing contract for this property. All tenants and their visitors need to register their cars with us as the property managers. And we have a tow truck that drives the site periodically, and if they go through and they look and see if those cars are not on the registered list, those cars will get towed. And typically, that is the best way that we've found to solve the problems. And we're not anticipating a need for more than the number of parking spaces that we've seen here.
What about the commercial use in the volleyball area. Pardon me?
So again, it's what you see around the sides of the existing west wing of the building. The calculations that our engineers have done indicates that that parking is adequate. Remember that the only parking that's there now is what is south of that west wing. And we've heard, again anecdotally, that sometimes people will park in the lot that's adjacent to the medical building.
Right.
But just look at the number of additional parking spaces that are being provided back there, and we're really not providing any additional commercial use. So we're providing, I would say, probably almost double the number of existing parking spaces that are there on our property instead of relying on overflow onto an adjacent property.
What's the current parking count?
I don't know. Frank, you know number of parking spaces?
Current count, about 115 spaces.
About 115 spaces at the site
So
total.
we're adding, 86, 201, I think is the.
We're at 206, so we're at 90.
206?
Yeah.
And then how many are in the front lot?
It's many fewer than that. I don't know exactly how many are there.
88? And what is the expected residential demand?
Well, again, we went through that information. We used the more conservative number, which was 1.29 parking spaces per residential unit. So, Dennis, do you know how many we have now? About 111 parking spaces are being proposed for residential.
And that was after staff review. We had asked them to up the parking on those lots.
111 is in the front lot? I'm
No.
sorry, you said
88 in the round?
88 is in the front, and 111 is the expected demand?
Want to speak to that?
Sorry. You said the front is residential, and that's why I'm asking.
No.
Good evening. My name is Steve Corcoran, Director of Traffic Engineering at Erickson Engineering, and prepared both the traffic and parking studies. We went through and looked at a number of data sources, including existing multifamily parking demand in Batavia, other parts of Chicago, as well as some national sources. So worst case, we're thinking it's 1.39 spaces per unit on average for the whole development. So that's 111 spaces, or let's say 111 vehicles that are needed for an 80-unit apartment complex. Of those 111, 88 are provided out front, and those are the primary resident spaces. And then the difference between the 88 and 111, so 23, are additional spaces are provided in the back for and there's a residential or side door, but the public door is out front.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm sorry, can I have something clarified?
Yes.
Did you say that the 88 spaces in the front in the ring are commercial spaces?
No, those are residential.
Okay, those are residential too.
Correct. Yeah, and I think maybe there was some confusion. There aren't 88 spaces there now.
There are not?
88 is what we are proposing.
Okay.
Right now, the oval is not a double-sided parking configuration. It's a single-sided parking configuration. I don't know exactly how many parking spaces there are, but it's fewer than 88.
You know how many handicap spots between the front and the back? Sorry.
You're asking about existing or proposed?
Proposed.
Proposed. There are eight total handicap parking spaces proposed.
Okay, and none in the front, is he saying?
In the back. So
In the back.
yeah, right up against the tower, the front entrance, that's where the handicap parking spaces are. And then there are three additional handicap parking spaces in the back.
So 5 in the front, 3 in the back?
No, 8 in the front and 3 in the back.
I'm sorry,
11 total. Yes.
Okay.
That brings up to the point of handicap accessibility. where is that? And also, are there any elevators in the building?
Dennis?
Because I couldn't see them in the...
There is an elevator in the building. It's existing. It's a approved size for handicap use. The Dennis Langley, architect, Weiss Langley Weiss. And then the front entry is slightly above grade, but we're going to, that square paving that you see in the front of the building is a slope ramp up to the grade inside the building. So it's fully accessible. We have a number of accessible units as well.
Where
There.
where is the
Elevator?
elevator?
Elevators in, it's in the, it's just behind the tower in the main building. So the,
So if you look on this screen here, the elevator is right where the laser is. The handicap ramp is coming into the stairs right here.
Where is the back entrance at? Can you show me on here?
What?
The back entrance.
It's right there.
Oh, that's it, okay. So,
We're taking that road down to grade.
Pardon me?
We're taking that level down to grade for access from the rear. So there'll be controlled entrance.
You'll need to speak into the microphone.
There'll be controlled entrance from the front rear.
Was it said there are 3 entrances in the front?
Well, there's a number of other exits. There's only 2 controlled entries. There's 5 total exits on the ground floor. The other thing to realize is that I think 60% of the units are on the first floor. So there's not that many units on the second and third floor.
The question, should have probably put this in, we were talking about sidewalks. There was one of the speakers tonight mentioned something about, originally there was an east sidewalk, and he wanted to make sure we reassured an east sidewalk. He emphasized that. Is that
It's there. There's a sidewalk already there along Route 31. We're not proposing changes to that except if it needs repairs. Where we're proposing a new sidewalk is along the south property line, and that's still subject to some negotiation with KDOT because we are dedicating the 50 feet of right-of-way. So we're still talking to them about whether that new sidewalk on the south side is in their right-of-way or it's just outside their right-of-way.
okay? So he was.
I think it might have been around the parking.
He was talking about around...
I think, yeah, what he was referring to is in this oval here and providing additional sidewalks within that oval. I think that's what that question was.
And actually, he had mentioned that he had contacted the state agency, and they rebutted supposedly what you had previously been told.
I don't know exactly what the conversation was. I think I probably gave an answer that was maybe not super clear at the last time. Our preference is not to put sidewalks in that oval. If we have to do it as something that this commission feels is appropriate, we will certainly explore that with the historic preservation staff at the state agency. And, we're not unwilling to do it, but our preference is not to do it right now. Our view as and Dennis as our design professional is that it detracts somewhat from the historic nature and is not historically consistent with the original oval. However, if Mr. Kiefer has done some of our homework for us and the SHPO is willing to consider that, then we will certainly have that conversation with them.
I think it's a safety factor to have the sidewalk around there, because residents are going to be parking there.
Okay.
Let's go to this side.
What is the current occupancy, square footage wise, for the building as a whole? And then I suppose if you subtracted out the Proforce, the kind of rear addition, what percentage of the square footage is that addition?
So the whole complex is about 131,000 square feet. I'm going to defer to Frank Mares, who's the current owner, for what the current square footage is. you know?
Leasable area is about 124,000 square feet, it's currently about 60%.
So Frank said that the leasable area of that 131,000 square feet is about 124,000 square feet, and it's about 60% occupied. 73,000 square feet is occupied.
Okay, so about 60%, 73 occupied, okay?
Yeah.
Sue, you have anything?
Well, I wanted to ask, first of all, about the testimonies tonight. Does staff feel that the questions have been answered already? Does the applicant feel that he wants to address any of those questions? And I have a question about, there was a point made about the absence of some of the letters of testimony not in our packets. Do we have any clarification on that?
Yes, a number of those correspondences from Mr. Burns were actually received before the public notice went out, and it was my mistake to not go back and grab his correspondences to add to the ones that we received after the public notice went out. Many of the correspondences that he submitted were of a technical nature, asking about many of the things that Mr. Burns did testify to. The issues of stormwater management and the what effect that would have on his property. But we can certainly provide those.
So they have been answered previously or have been addressed?
Yes.
How about the windows? The statement about the windows, the gentleman asked if you have any clarification about that or any?
I guess what specifically about the windows, which there were several questions about the windows, so what specifically?
I think he was talking about the and I don't pretend to know even about the different numbers of thicknesses or regulations with lights, so and so forth. Is that all been under regulations by some other body? Will you have to do it?
Well, yes. So we are, as I've shared in earlier meetings, we are regulated at multiple levels here. We're regulated at your level, at the City of Batavia level, both by you and by the Historic Preservation Commission, and ultimately by the City Council. We're regulated by Kane County. We're regulated by the state of Illinois, multiple agencies, and by the National Park Service through the Historic Preservation Tax Credit Program. And so the window scheme that we have proposed here has been reviewed by the State Historic Preservation Office and approved and forwarded on to the National Park Service for ultimate approval. We're actually expecting final approval of the National Park Service before the next Historic Preservation Commission meeting on whatever the date was, September 11th, I think. And so the windows from a historic preservation perspective meet the Secretary of the Interior standards. The life safety issues that have been brought up, we've had numerous meetings with city staff going back about a year and a half on this project. The city engineer has been part of this process. The fire chief has been part of this process. We've walked the building with the fire chief and the mayor. They've raised their concerns about it, and we have tried to address those in as straightforward a way as we can. Ultimately, it comes down to the building commissioner and submitting a set of permit plans that complies with the building code currently in effect for the city of Batavia. And we intend to do that. We believe our design complies with the building code in all material ways.
And that would include the Illinois Energy Code?
Correct.
So the thermal value of those materials has to meet that code, which is pretty strict.
That's right.
Thank you.
Joel, you had a comment?
Yes, we did share a number of correspondences between Mr. Burns and staff with the Plan Commission. I believe we did that for the August 2nd hearing, but there were a number of granted, they were within a large packet of correspondences that we received. So whether or not you actually remember reading them, there was an email, there were several emails, one of July 14th that I had sent in response to questions from Mr. Burns, and I believe the others were just part of that same email chain, but there were other emails as well. One on July 13th, one on July 12th.
I'm going to move through the commissioners in an orderly manner so that everyone has an opportunity to ask questions. I'm going to go back to Bill. Anything specific at this time? Doesn't mean you have to have a question at this time. It's just that.
Most of mine have been covered, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sarah?
My concern is with the glass block windows. When you gave us a picture of what those lofts would look like, it looks like they were transparent, that you could see out into the Fox Valley, into the river and everything, and to me, it just doesn't seem like those, you can see through those, and I just don't know.
Yeah, they're not transparent.
They're translucent, yeah. And so the intention of remember that the renderings are kind of an artist's interpretation of the building. They're intended to convey a sense of light and a sense of some color coming through that you can distinguish between a blue sky and a gray sky. But it was never our intention or understanding that you would be able to see through it the way you see through a picture window.
And because of the constructions of the Historic Commission, there's those glass block bricks have to remain.
Absolutely. That is the root challenge to this building. It is, as a landmarked property, there is no way to meet the Secretary's standards and still take those glass blocks out. And we have tried. In fact, if the folks who have apparently gone through, page by page of our earlier submissions and applications to IDA and others, some of our original plans showed, as you see on the west side elevation, they show the vertical windows. We showed some of those windows here on the south wing and on the north wing, and both the SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, and ultimately Kane County said, we don't want you to do that. If you try to do that, it won't meet the standards. So we are wrestling with a set of regulations that basically requires us to maintain the glass blocks as they are. And we'll repair them, obviously. We'll tuck point them and replace the broken ones, but the basic field of glass block across the entire east front of the building needs to remain.
That is in the landmarked portion of the building. Just so you're aware that the two wings, if you do recall, were additions and are not landmarked, and therefore there is some flexibility in the design, and that's why they're showing the vertical window bands.
Well, that's what we thought. And that's what we thought, and that's what we hoped. And subsequently, Kane County was the first body. Kane County has delegated historic preservation authority over this. And so Kane County, in their review, said, nah, we really don't like that approach. We want you to take the same subsill window approach that you're taking on the main body of the building into the two wings. And ultimately, the state and federal levels agreed with the county.
Also, just so you know, the city's Historic Preservation Commission doesn't break a building down into parts. It is, the property is either historic or it's not in its entirety. So they do not make a distinction between wings and things like that that are historic or not historic.
But my other question is, we had a picture from one of the public saying that the temperature was 120 degrees at the glass block. And, is there something, I don't know exactly where that was in the building or anything, but does that really, is that a true depiction of what the temperature is? And is there something to reduce that temperature? I'm talking about this one, remember that?
I don't know. I don't know what equipment they used. I don't know what they were looking at when they took that photo. I think the intent behind that picture is probably correct. Glass block is a poor thermal insulator. So you can almost think of glass block as being sort of a not great window. And they're big. And so the intention or the intention of the questions, as I understand it, is to say, well, these units are going to be really hard to heat and cool. But the fact is that we are doing as much insulation on the interior of these units as we can. We are using a very efficient, very appropriate contemporary heating and cooling system for this. The other thing that's important to remember is that Chicago is a winter or a heating-dominated climate. So actually having that heat gain on the east side of the building may help reduce those tenants' heat bills in the roughly 7 or 8 months of the year that requires heating. Now, the flip side of that is that there will be additional cooling load through those windows in the summer months. But in balance, our system is designed to address both of those thermal conditions. And we believe that the heating and cooling design we have for this building is adequate to the task.
Joan, you have anything?
Yeah, I was curious about the tot lot and the soccer field with banking, thank you, for parking. Now, is that where the land would be, where the tot park and the soccer field are?
That's right.
So they would be gone then, right?
Correct. That's right.
Okay.
So they wouldn't be replaced?
No, I mean, that's not our intention right now.
Mhm.
But it's also our firm belief, based on, we believe, solid engineering information, that we will never need to rely on the land banking solution. We believe pretty strongly that the 206 parking spaces that are proposed on this site is more than adequate to address both the commercial and residential needs of this building. And going back to the KLOA testimony, the opposing engineers essentially supported that conclusion as well.
One of the proposals is to ask you, require you to get a certificate of credit for that.
We can't do that. Basically, it is, that in itself may render the project financially infeasible.
What staff has suggested in the conditions of approval is to develop a backup special service area that would be in place. The applicant would agree to not object to it, since there would be a single property owner involved in that. And what that would allow us to do is create a special tax on the property that would then pay for the additional land bank parking if it's ever necessary. So just like we have special service areas that pay for detention maintenance and other things, we could use that and activate that to actually pay for the costs if the owner does decide that they don't want to do that. So that is our financial mechanism to guarantee that gets done.
Again, what is that called?
Special service area.
Special service area. Okay, thank you.
Just out of curiosity, the tot lot and the soccer field, is that strictly going to be for residents, or is that open to the public?
It is strictly for residents here.
So that really then shouldn't be generating its own traffic?
Correct.
If I understand correct. Okay.
I'm going to continue in the vein of parking circulation. Can you show us the drop-off area for the residents?
So the intention right now, we don't have a separate pullout. And so in terms of drop-off, the intent would be to probably sign the front here with visitor parking only signs, so that if folks were coming to drop off, they would most likely park in these 4 parking spaces or 5 parking spaces in the front that are not designated handicap parking spaces. And then they are essentially right at the entrance there. They would walk across, and the handicapped striped access zones are wide enough for people to walk between the cars safely. In terms of things like package delivery, it is the thought that the trucks would come in and they would put their flashers on and they would come into the building. The mailbox area would be inside. They would drop their packages off, and then they would leave.
It looks like there's a double line, I'll call it on the north side of that handicap parking. Is that just up above, right in there? What is that kind of second curve?
So what those lines are is trying to address the historic geometry of the oval in the front. the original application was a kind of a discussion about what needs to go in there. So it's this space in here, this space, the kind of interstitial spaces that define the geometry. We had hoped that space would not be asphalt because we think it's better to have that be more kind of a landscape element. And through some discussions with city staff, I think the staff have ultimately agreed that these will be curb lines, but they won't be asphalt. They will just be areas of landscaping defined by curbs.
So could that be designated as a drop-off zone?
Potentially, yes.
I think it's kind of important to have some place for someone to pull up without taking designated parking, and especially a delivery truck.
I think that's a great idea.
I also strongly support that there's a pedestrian sidewalk that connects to the parking in the front of the building and potentially all the way out to the sidewalk along Route 31. I know that there is the route along Fabian, but
okay,
just
well,
see, residents walking up there, they need a place to walk without having to be in the driveway, and especially if they have children.
Right. So to the extent that one of the previous speakers' conversations with the State Historic Preservation Office was correct, and the SHPO would be willing to accept that, and ultimately Washington, through the National Park Service, would be willing to accept it, we're willing to build that.
And then can you pan down to the entrance drive off of Fabian? So there's a lot of discussion about ingress, egress at this location and truck access, turning radii, emergency vehicles. Can you go through a little more detail, the plan for that area, in addition to the existing parking that will now be in the right-of-way?
Sure.
Certainly. Let's take this a little piece by piece. First of all, this parking right here will now become right in here. Whoops. Right here is the new right-of-way line. It's not shown on this drawing. It's just south of this circulation road. And so those, I believe it's 7 or 8 spaces will be lost. And so those are been removed in all the calculations. So those will be demoed and just become landscape.
Oh, okay. So there won't be any parking there?
Yeah, these 7 spaces right here will remain. And this is, again, the front door of the mattress store. So they can still have their customers park here, and then employees can park up in here to use the mattress store. A couple things that have been mentioned. In the KDOT letter, they asked the question about what's going on with this road. This is an old gravel road that's been there for many years. There's no cross-access easement, and this is going to be curbed and guttered because we don't want, first of all, this is a vacant lot. We don't want people driving through the property to get to this vacant lot, but they will, so this will be curb and gutter, plus we don't want people to stop here and try to make a left turn and then block people behind them in that location. In terms of the truck, we are working with the tenant to, as I think some pictures were submitted showing a truck today. This is all, right now, all just a big asphalt area. Having a truck just backs in and blocks this whole area. That's how it operates today. But we have a couple ideas to change this so that the truck is more at an angle, and we're working that through with the tenant. So we don't have the final plan, but we've had several discussions with staff on how that may happen. So when we get that finalized, that'll be in the final engineering plan. And then last but not least, you saw some documents showing the fire truck trying to make this U-turn. I kind of basically disagree with that auto turns diagram that the gentleman submitted. But the primary, the intention is the primary fire access for the front of the building is going to be off of Route 31 and from here to go back into the west side. But, we understand traffic or there's an accident and fire trucks can make that turn. They can make that turn. So
what's the length of a fire truck?
It's,
They're different ones, aren't depending on which direction.
Well,
I think it's something like 46 or 48 feet that we were using for that analysis.
so that'd probably be the largest vehicle that would be entering and making that turn.
We have auto turns. We have the U-turn in there, No, we don't have the U-turn. And of course, I can't read that from here. But there's the right there is the vehicle we used. I think it's 48, but I can't. I'm sorry, 43.
Okay.
That's the diagram we used. So that's a ladder truck. Obviously, smaller ambulances and trucks can make that turn.
Can you show the diagram again?
Yeah.
I'm trying to read that. It's very hard to read at that lower section there because it's kind of faded out. I don't see. So you're not showing a
We're
truck
not showing.
making
We're not
that
showing the
turn.
U-turn, but after that gentleman brought that up, we did check it, and they can make this U-turn.
They can make that turn.
Yes. And, you gotta remember, the fire trucks can drive anywhere on the road, so they can do what they need to do to get in there.
It doesn't look like you're showing the curb removed. You're showing that south parking still existing, but that's being removed, and that
That is
curb will extend straight out to the west.
That's correct.
So you could soften that radius of the curb at, right.
Oh, absolutely.
location to make sure that there's no issue with emergency vehicle making that turn.
Correct.
Because I agree with you, that ideally would come in the front, but in an emergency, it may come from a different direction for some reason, and you'd want, obviously, them to be able to access the property as quickly.
Right, and then if it comes from the west too, they'd make this S turn. They can do that too.
Right.
So.
Fire has not expressed any specific concerns about access to the site. So
Okay.
They did not, did you say? They did not?
they have not expressed any specific concerns about access.
Thank you. Sue?
Yes, well, I was going to say, I concur with and I think we've talked about the need for a sidewalk in the front.
Okay.
We could make that a condition, I would assume.
Pending approval of the.
Uh-huh. And then I wondered about lighting in the parking lots. Has that been addressed in terms of safety and what, I know we've always, in other proposals, we've been given photos of the kind of light and how it would be
Yeah, that was part of their original
directed.
submittal.
It was?
We have a photometric diagram, which, is essentially, it's a technical diagram that doesn't convey a whole lot of information. I can put the rendering back up on the screen, which shows sort of the visual intent of the parking lot, if that would be useful to you.
The one in front, because the building, of course, is set so far back that
Sure.
it would be very dark in the evening, and I wondered about how that will be lit.
Well, the city ordinances, again, restrict light from flowing onto adjacent properties, correct?
Yes, they do.
Correct.
So this would have to meet that.
For the back, you mean, in the back?
For any adjacent property.
Yeah, but in the front, there is none. I mean, so I just wondered how it's going to.
So it's you can see in this image, which is really taken from the street, it's actually taken just a little bit up. So if it's as if you're driving in a tall SUV or a tall van, you can see the streetlights, and from this scale, they are pretty small. And we're happy to, I don't know that we brought copies of this today, but we can distribute this picture so you can see how the lighting works with the cars. All of these cars are being downlit. And the light fixtures, as others have noted, are low cutoff lights, which means they are designed to minimize any overflow of lights beyond the area that they're designed to be lit. So,
What is the height of the lighting?
10 feet.
And does it,
10 feet?
10 feet.
That's pretty low.
It's designed to kind of maintain that image there.
Throughout the entire property, including the rear?
Is that right?
It's on the lighting, the rear is on the building, some are a little higher. The ones in the front are 10 feet. That just means they're more frequent. We want to not get up into the visual image of the building from the street.
Which is fine. I just think, I know residents express concern, and if I lived there, I would be concerned too with the lighting in the back. So we need to know the height. And if you're going to speak on, I would appreciate if you speak into the microphone so everybody can hear you.
So the photometrics follow the light fixtures that we've selected. They are the low cutoff. The 10 feet is the light pole, and it's on a little higher, I think it's 1.5 feet required by Batavia stand. So overall, it's 11.5 feet. But we then space those lights to provide adequate light, because it's clearly easier to get more light with higher lights and brighter lights, but we do lower lights and more lights to make sure it's not so visually impairing the side of the building. But we do have a lighting engineer. If there's any more questions about that, we can answer them in specific. And it shows all the light levels. And we can review it again if there's any worry about it. But it was part of your requirements that we provide this photometric and show the cutoffs and show the fixtures, a whole fixture spec as well.
Yeah.
So
I remember seeing that. I can't find it right now.
Okay.
But,
There they are.
so what
There
is
they
the
are.
height of the lighting in the rear?
There we go.
I don't know if I heard that.
Well, there's a mixture of pole lights and building lights.
Okay.
And they're also low cutoff, and so they don't shine across the property.
Can we go through that in detail on the plan? Does anybody have any questions while they have this image up?
Yeah, I think you can either get to the site plan or the lighting plan to see where the fixtures are. You have to zoom in probably.
Is there any comments on the fixtures?
You see the fixture, you can see them there, they're letters and numbers. So you have pole lights shining towards the parking lot, and then you have lights on the building shining out onto the parking area.
Must be way back in this.
So the lights on the building, but they'll shine directly down?
Yes.
Not floodlights that shine out towards the...
No, they're all low cutoff, and they're all meeting those requirements, so you don't get any spill at the property line.
I'm sorry, what's it at the property line?
No light spill across the
Zero,
property.
basically?
Basically, what it shows there, which is basically zero, yeah.
Okay.
Those are the foot candle readings. All the dots
Yeah,
are foot candle.
it's hard to read them from here.
No, I know. It's a huge scale, too. It's just hard.
Right.
These numbers are zero.
The point.
So it does.
So the LA and the LB are the fixture locations?
Yes, they're on the building, and then the other ones are.
And so the ones on the
poles.
property line are
L3s.
would be designed to face eastward and shine the light eastward.
Basically,
and
they shine.
cut off to the west.
Yeah, they shine down and out, away from the property line.
Sorry, that was your question, I think.
That's okay.
Just trying to get clarification.
That's good. I'm glad.
Any follow-up on that before we go to Tom?
No, go ahead, Tom.
Along Fabian Parkway, I know it was talked about, but I think right in, right out. I think especially at peak times, if you're going to have people turning left onto Fabian, could be certainly troublesome. So right in, right out, even possibly at peak times, that would be a concern I've got. We've talked about the sidewalk around the racetrack. I think that's a good idea. I am worried about trucks, and I didn't see that as a condition, and maybe it's just part of the plan. But I had worked at a mattress store years ago, and the big semis had come in, and I think that's got to be taken into account here, whether it's a mattress store or anything else in the future. And then the gentleman had dropped off at the very end of the public hearing a list of questions. So I don't know if all of those were answered or not. I'm assuming no, and would be curious what those questions were. Well, not necessarily immediately, but.
Well, there's a lot of information handed out by the speakers tonight.
Yep.
Some of it we've had previously, some of it we didn't. So, we'll have to take a look at that, I guess, and give it some consideration.
If you'd like, I can speak to at least the first two of your questions. I can't speak to the information that was provided that we haven't seen. But as far as the right in, right out goes, that was, it's something that we're willing to do, either through signage or through an actual traffic diverter that would channel the cars exiting the site westward onto Fabian Parkway. KDOT mentioned some things about that. We did hear from, in earlier testimony from the Homestead, that they were concerned that if that happened, that people who wanted to go eastbound would turn right heading westbound onto Fabian, and then kind of try to scoot across and make a U-turn onto the Homestead property. And so, we're dealing with kind of two sets of comments. Obviously, we need to work with city engineering to kind of arrive at a final result with KDOT as well. We're willing to consider it if the engineering consensus is it's the thing that makes the most sense to do it here.
Just as a clarification, current use, fully occupied, would be at or above the proposed intensity? I'm just asking the question. I don't know if Mr. Mayor knows the question or not, but answer.
You're talking about traffic generation of the existing 74,000 square feet. Steve, you want to?
Sure. We looked at in our traffic study if the building was used by a variety of different commercial users. So 131,000 square feet occupied by a combination of office or medical office or office with a couple of restaurants in it on the ground floor, and they all generated significantly more traffic than the current proposal, along with the existing
And under
commercial.
the current zoning, that's allowed?
Yes.
Under the current use?
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom, anything else?
No, those were my only questions or comments.
Okay.
No.
I don't know if we found the list. Is this the list? So we found a list of questions.
There's that list, and then there's another one that he brought up towards the end. A handwritten one.
And then we have the handwritten
I have
questions
one other-
related to the antennas.
I have another question.
Well, we're long from finishing our questions, so I'm going to go back to Bill first, and then we'll keep working this way,
Like a racetrack.
like a racetrack.
It was referenced.
Bill, we can come back to you if you don't have anything specific.
I got it right here. I was going to actually go back to Jamie Tate's question. Forgive me because I'm new, but going into the comp land process, do we have answers to her questions on how was mixed use applied and who made the decisions? Like I said, forgive me if it's redundant, but.
I didn't hear the question, sorry. You got to speak into the microphone.
So going back to Jamie Tate when she talked about the comp land process, like I said, forgive me because I'm new, but she had questions about was there public participation and who made those decisions, and I just wondered if there was answers to help.
Yeah, we can ask that as staff.
Sure, I can address that. I believe Commissioner Peterson is the only commissioner remaining from when we went through the process to formulate and adopt a comprehensive plan. The city sought participation widely throughout the community for people to join in on the process. There were different subgroups formed to work together to arrive at each individual element within the plan, except for the bicycle plan, which was done by a consultant. And there were many public meetings held for each one of those subgroups, for each one of the individual elements in the comprehensive plan. And when each of those subgroups was finished drafting the element, each individual element, it was brought in front of the Plan Commission as a whole to work through the drafting of each or to work through the drafts of each element. And all of this was done in open meetings. There were 40, 50 some odd open meetings. The group that drafted the land use element also had the final look at the land use map before it was gathered for the full collated draft of the whole document. The Plan Commission did recommend approval of the land use map. I believe they recommended approval with mixed use as a land use designation for that property. And then the Plan Commission's recommended draft was presented to, that was at a public hearing that the Plan Commission reviewed the collective draft. and they made a recommendation to the city council, and the city council reviewed it at separate meetings of the Community Development Committee. At that time, it was a 4-committee system, and then the Community Development Committee made a recommendation to the full city council for adoption of the plan, and mixed-use, land-use classification was applied to that property.
My other question has to do with touring the facilities, and I know that Historic Preservation just did that. I kind of feel like it would be personally beneficial, so I want to throw thoughts out there to see what everybody else. Of course, that creates another meeting and kind of delays the process. But
Right. Well, I know personally I've been in the building. I don't know if other commissioners have been in the building. And obviously, we've all had an opportunity to tour the property, which is really what we're deliberating on as far as the zoning is concerned. But it's a point that we can certainly discuss, and if there's an opportunity, I know that the HPC went through it. I don't know if there'd be an
Outside.
Oh, HPC only did the exterior, okay.
And then just my last comment here is I strongly support the sidewalks on the racetrack too.
Great, thanks. Sarah?
What about landscaping and the western boundary of the property? Is there, I just needed some clarification as to what landscaping, because there was something mentioned tonight about, and I know we've gone in the past about making sure that things are, I don't know, shrouded or shaded or just delineated from the property. I'm trying to think of the right word.
You mean buffered?
Screened.
Screened?
Well, there's an existing land that belongs to the township, and that's an easement strip that's all overgrown and naturalistic, so there was no anticipation of doing anything with that but leaving it in place. It clearly separates the two properties. In fact, it grows over across our property line.
Can you point to that, Drew?
And you want? That, right there, yeah.
Okay, so that double line,
That double line is a township easement, yeah.
and it's mature.
Very mature, as is the whole northern property line, yeah. Yeah, so that all would stay.
Provides
That northwest corner, that was going to be landscaping there?
That's all natural landscape now. Along that, also that whole northern area is a township easement as well. It's a natural area. It's a drainage canal, really.
Is that shared with the property owners to the west?
The property is owned by the property owner to the, well, no, that easement, I believe, is owned by the property owner to the north, who also owns the easement that borders our property. But it has to be maintained as open drainage on that north part. I'm not sure what has to happen to the township easement between the two properties, but it's there and nobody can build on it.
There's a large swale there.
Yeah, I'm not
It all
sure. It's so
drains.
dense, I've not been in there, I don't know
It
how.
all drains to the east, I believe.
On the north, there's a large swell, correct? I'm not sure on the west.
Oh, on the west, yeah. I'm saying on the north. It's
Yes,
large
very much.
swale.
That's where all the drainage goes, plus down to Fabian.
And
the side drainage.
That goes underneath?
Goes underneath the road,
Okay.
yeah.
And to
And
the
then
river-
down to
into
the
the
river,
river?
yes. And I think it drains large number of properties from the north as well. That easement keeps going north along Geneva.
So we have two sides substantially screened from
Yes.
adjacent properties by
Yes.
existing natural vegetation.
Yes. I mean, we're willing to plant where it seems natural or needed, but that's more ambitious than anything we could ever plant.
Would there ever be a reason to think that that would be removed?
That's kind of, I don't know, maybe,
I might
maybe
kinda ask
you're,
them the
maybe you're,
staff, I guess.
I have no idea how you treat those
It's-
pieces of land.
No, it's not owned by the township. The property owner to the north owns the old railroad right-of-way, which is along the north property line, and then there's a 30-foot strip along the west property line that they also own, so.
Who owns that?
The property owner to the north.
The property owner to the north
Owns the 30-foot strip that goes down to
Really?
Fabian, yes.
And it's all township.
And that's
It's
all
not,
incorporated.
Wow.
So, what they do with that, is subject to, whatever they have to do with, the county and whatever else they might do unless they annex that into the city of Geneva, so.
Okay. Sarah, any follow-up on the landscape question? Joan?
No, I'm good right now.
When we're on landscaping, and I know that state agency was pretty specific about no additional landscaping in the front.
Right.
I guess I have some concerns with that, and I don't know if there's any leeway there with regards to their requirements. I do have questions related to just open space in general. There's pretty significant open space to the north of the front parking area. Has the state agency indicated that that cannot be used for any specific purpose?
They haven't addressed anything because we haven't proposed anything other than the open lawn there. I think the intention, it's a little bit unusual for the historic preservation process to encompass as extensive a site as this. Typically, their purview is the building and kind of the immediate surroundings around the building, but the historic preservation professional approach or professional opinion here is that the great oval and the great lawn at the front of this building is really integral to this building's historic character. And so our working assumption in working with the state and the feds and ultimately the Batavia Historical Preservation Commission is that the lawn is kind of sacrosanct, and maintaining the oval, the essential geometry of the oval, maintaining as much of the view of the building from property edge to property edge up from Route 31 is really important to the historic preservation image of the building. And so we've tried to be as true to that spirit as possible. In terms of additional landscaping, we do have historic aerial photos that show there have been a series of trees along the south edge that have kind of come and gone over the years, and so that is the landscape approach that we've taken, is to try to bring that line of trees back based on some of the historic aerial imagery. But other than that, as you can see, we've really tried to keep the lawn open as a lawn.
So back to my comment, are you saying that you're doing that because you want to be pure to the original design, or are you saying that the state agency is not allowed?
We have not proposed any additional landscaping beyond what you see here because we suspect they won't approve it, but we haven't pushed the issue with them.
Although you are showing landscaping along the front of the building, and that's
Correct.
to screen the vision windows
Exactly
at
right.
the base of the wall.
That's right.
So people in those apartments, the only place they can see out is at the 4 foot or below level, and they're looking into the back of a hedgerow.
Well, they're looking into, it's a 20-foot sort of landscaped area that is a buffer zone between the face of the building and the berm on which the screening plantings are planted. So there is something that is a kind of landscaped, it's not much in the way of landscaping, but it is a green space between the windows and the back of the screening landscape elements there.
Did you say 20 feet?
Yeah, approximately 20 feet. So you can see here, I'm sorry, it's a little hard to point and talk into this at the same time, but the tower, the basic structural module of this building is 25 feet. So this is the tower here. The tower is 25 feet from the corner of the building to the face of the tower. And so this open area in here is a lawn, and the screening berm doesn't pick up until really it's kind of aligned with the edge of the tower. So it's actually more than 20 feet. It's about 25 feet. So the idea is that from inside the units, the people are looking onto a lawn, and then 25 feet away, they are looking at the backs of the screening elements.
With the exception of the wing to the north.
Correct. The wing to the north, it's closer in.
About half that.
We are shifting that?
So this is a very dynamic process. So during all these meetings, we've had continuous meetings with historic preservation people. So with Kane County and other people, they decided that we couldn't have windows in those upper sections of that addition. So we had to drop the windows. So now we have to move that landscaping berm to be out in line with the other berm. So we'll have a 25-foot lawn outside those windows as well. So we'll mirror that on the other side at the mattress factory, but that's not really a vision issue. That's a requirement that we put the windows in the mattress factory to maintain the symmetry of the project.
Thank you. As far as the front lawn areas, I would propose that regardless of how you designate them, children will be out there playing. You're on a significantly busy intersection, and I was wondering if there's any consideration for fencing, especially along Fabian and Route 31.
Again, we have not considered that issue because our assumption was that the historic preservation people at the state and federal level, I don't know about the Batavia Historic Preservation Commission, would not approve that. And the other thing to consider is that because we are, in essence, donating 50 feet of right-of-way to IDOT and or KDOT in order to help address the intersection issues, that fence line would have to be 50 feet back, both on the Route 31 side and on the Fabian side. So you're going to have these fairly visible fences kind of in the middle of the lawn, if you want. And we assumed that that would not be an acceptable condition.
Okay. I guess my concern is safety more than aesthetics.
It's, we hear that concern. It is a very large property. It's, about 500 feet, I think, from the face of the building down to the roadway. Yeah, you might have kids who are playing Frisbee down there, but I suspect that there is enough room, and again, it goes up into a wooded area here, that even if the kids are in this zone here, you're still 100 or 150 or even more feet away from the busy roadway. So our contention is that the site is big enough to still allow those activities with a margin of safety for the kids. Plus, we're providing a more structured area in the back for them.
Yeah, but the primary residential access is in the front.
Correct.
And the rear, but on the south side of the current commercial, we'll call it wing.
Mm-hmm.
So, access to that tot lot and the field is really, kind of inappropriate located based on where the residents would be accessing the property. Would there be an opportunity to do something in the front north of the parking? Maybe a fenced-in area there where parents could feel safe, especially with the younger children, going out onto front lawn. Maybe it's a recreation area of some fashion. Doesn't have to necessarily be a structure there. But I think that also kind of piggybacks on the earlier question, I forget, maybe it was Joan, about the potential land banking and expansion of the parking, and now you've lost any recreational opportunity because the parking would replace that.
No, we understand the concern and the question. I guess I would propose a view of that deals with the reality of the historic tax credit program. I am fairly certain that the historic preservation authorities at the state and federal level will not approve a fenced-in area on the north side of the property. We can certainly ask the question, and we can try it. But there is a 5-year holding period for the historic tax credits, after which there is a little more flexibility to address concerns on the property. So potentially, if the historic preservation authorities do not approve the concept that you're talking about, we could look at doing it, 5 years from the date of the beginning of the holding period for the credits.
If I may, both the Batavia Park District and the Geneva Park District have parks that are on arterial roadways that do not have fences, that are adjacent to parklands, park playing fields. Batavia Park District at West Main Park has no fences. There's another park that they own on the north side, and then Geneva Park District, since we're talking about Geneva Park District, the facility at Peck and Caneville also has playing fields that are right adjacent to the road. There are no fences there. So, I mean, it does happen.
I wonder, speaking to that?
Go ahead.
I just wondered, would they also not approve of benches or something out in the front? So if a parent were to be out there with a child, there'd be a place to sit.
I don't know. I think they probably would approve a small number of benches. And again, we can look into all of these things and ask the question.
Well, just to expand on that, because I did look through the design guidelines under multifamily. I know staff indicated that the design guidelines do not apply because it's mixed use, but quite frankly, if we're adding this much residential, I think it does apply. And to your point, the design guidelines talks about, first of all, private space for residents, which we don't have, in the way of balconies or patios, benches, picnic areas, pool, tennis, basketball. I mean, all of those things are kind of typical of what you would consider as part of a larger multifamily development. I know this is a unique property, but I do believe that it's something that we should consider, as we discuss this and look for ways that we can enhance the exterior use of the property. It is a large piece of property, so it would be wonderful for the residents to be able to take full advantage of that. Okay, now I forgot where I was at. I think we're going this way.
No. So far, what I've wondered about have been addressed.
Thank you.
So far. Tom?
Tom, you have anything?
Nothing new, no.
Be back to Bill.
Nothing new.
Sarah?
No.
John?
I was reviewing something that had been talked about, was moving the entrance in the front off of Route 31, moving it a little bit north. Now, I don't know if that was in any consideration, I mean, if that was really considered, or if that would propose more of a problem for taking that land from the Campana building and making it a driveway.
I think it was part of the KLOA recommendation, if I recall.
Part of the what?
The other traffic engineer that spoke.
Okay, so,
KLOA.
okay.
Did I say KOLA? Okay. Yeah, you're right, and I remember seeing that.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that's
Staff have any
something
input on that?
specifically.
I think that's, as part of this is going to depend on what the historic preservation agencies are going to say, because I think a lot of that is related to, again, the oval and the symmetry of the building and the access. And if you shift that access offset from there, that, skews that. So, from a traffic standpoint, yeah, it would be better to have it further north, if you possibly can. It's been that way for, decades and decades, and it's functioned okay, even when it was a factory, and there was a lot more traffic back when it was a factory. So, but that, certainly, would it work better if you had it further north? Yes.
Do you have any specific follow-up on that?
I mean, we thought it was a really interesting idea. I think Scott has identified that there is a concern about deviating from the symmetry of that. Again, it's the kind of thing after the 5-year holding period for the credits, and I suspect this would be something that would happen in concert with any state and county overall improvements to that intersection. The lion's share of where that new drive would be inside that 50-foot right-of-way that we are giving to the state or the county. And so we're willing to, have them do that and then make the appropriate connection within our property if that's the desire of the agency. So
I guess to clarify, your traffic engineer would be supportive of moving that entrance if the state would allow it?
I'll let him speak for himself.
The simple answer is yes and no.
Pardon me?
And now the complicated explanation. Very simply, we don't see the huge need to move it today. There is a painted median in here, and there is room for a couple cars to get out of the way so they're not in the through lanes to make a left into here. But remember, these are going to be the primary users of this driveway, the residents, and they're going to learn the best way to get in here. If you're coming from the south or from the east, you can easily just make the left at the signal or come straight and make the right and get into this parking lot. So there's a balance for that. Basically, so my response is no, I don't see the need to move that today. But we understand from our conversations already with Kane County, when they come in to do the major redo, they're looking at putting dual left turn lanes in here on southbound 31, which by the time, and dual left turn lanes need a barrier median curb. At that time, that's probably going to extend past here. And so the question is, when they do the design, A, can we get a left turn lane up in here before the bridge structure or culvert? Or B, this remains as then at that time becomes a right in, right out. So, long term, that's something's it will happen. But at the moment, I think we're fine, and really let the future of the roadway project dictate the final decision. And that's when really IDOT and KDOT can do what they want to do, and for the driveway.
And the state agency then obviously would have some impact because they may say you can't move that entrance.
They may say that to IDOT, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know the legality of who controls that or wins that battle. But if the agency wants it to stay there, then it'll end up being a right in, right out, no left turns in.
Thank you.
Okay, that's all.
Anything else on that?
No, nothing else.
There were other questions that were asked. One of them was related to the cell tower. The gentleman that spoke provided a list of written questions. Is it true that what appears to be an antenna is actually an enclosure that houses 2 antenna arrays? This makes 32 antenna currently. So yeah, I had a question about the enclosure. I find it interesting that, the historic integrity of the building, they're allowing an extension on that tower. Because quite frankly, from my perspective, I'd rather see the antenna that exists there now than that.
Well, this was actually SHPO's idea. This was their proposal. They said they despise those antennas there.
But they're there now.
They're there now. And they are looking at this project as an opportunity to mitigate what they, from a historic preservation perspective, to be unacceptable visual intrusions into the pure geometry of the tower. And so this was something they proposed, and it's a pretty common preservation solution. There are a lot of churches all around the country, probably even some in Batavia, that have cell antennas in their belfries. Because there are screens that don't change the historic appearance of them, that are designed to look like the old building, but behind them, perhaps the church is getting some revenue from a cell phone company in order to help maintain an old building. So it's a common approach, and the State Historic Preservation Office and the National Park Service see it all the time. I think like all of you here today, the historic preservation professionals who are working on this project know that a certain amount of compromise is necessary in order to get this project done, which has been so challenging for many years. I know the SHPO, Anthony Rubano, who comes up, has been looking at this building and looking at varied solutions for this building for 20 years. And so, he's told us that he thinks that the approach that we propose is the closest that he has ever seen to the right solution to the best historic preservation approach to this building. So it does change the appearance of the tower. It changes the proportions of the tower. There's no doubt about that. But again, it removes the visually distracting elements of the antennas and consolidates those pieces of equipment behind a unified screen.
If I may, one of the things that happened during the early on discussions when SHPO was talking about it is they wanted to actually have a separate monopole antenna on the site as opposed to this. And we thought frankly that was ridiculous to have a perfectly good structure that would be able to hide the antennas as opposed to having a separate monopole structure on the property. So they backed off of that.
So,
I'm not sure I agree with that, but. So the part of the question was, are the antennas being expanded? Or I guess does that opportunity exist? I don't know what currently is allowed there. I know that it went through HPC originally and received approval.
Yeah, so there will now be, there's 10 antenna now in 3 directions with this, so there'll be 4 directions. So just so you know, this is the product that will be the stealth material. In fact, if you Google stealth, you'll see that they do this all the time. They blend in with historic buildings. So it's a texture that actually we had at the site very much matches the brick. So it'll look like an extension of the tower and blends in quite well. I think the proportions will eventually kind of settle in and it'll be used to it. I think it looks better in the rendering than I thought. But it gets all of those that equipment off the side. The other thing is that those cell tower providers now want to change out their equipment. So they get a 106 review by the state, and the state's going to tell them they can't put that equipment back on the tower. It has to come off of the tower. So they're all getting in compliance with their 106 requirements, plus getting out of the tower. We'd also have to take them off just to repair the building.
Pardon?
We'd have to take them off just to make the proper repairs.
What is this composition?
It's a fiberglass material. And all the framing for that will be fiberglass, which doesn't interfere with the radio waves. There's I don't know if we submitted it to you, there's a complete drawing of how that's all built that we can provide.
Is that color fast, so it wouldn't fade?
Yes, it seems to be a ceramic type material on that.
Have you used
or
it
something.
before?
What?
Have you used it before?
No.
Just curious what kind of history it has.
Well, the company has a large history. I can delve into that a little bit more.
Has a steel support frame behind it then?
Fiberglass. It's all fiberglass.
All fiberglass.
Yeah. So, and then the antenna are right behind it on a bars, and it's kind of looks like a Home Depot special. It's like 3 feet on center, fiberglass tubes, angles, because you have to have a lot of them because they're not that strong.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
This is probably more for staff, and I don't know if we can answer it. Why is Campana Building the only commercial or any building in Batavia to have WCF installed?
We don't have a lot of tall buildings. I mean, that's
So it's no
I mean,
specific
we have a lot of
reason.
wireless antennas that are on city structures, water towers and things like that. And then there are also other freestanding antennas that are on private property. So we don't have a lot of tall buildings in the community. So we just don't have them. But it's very common.
I'm sorry, I'm reading the questions to see if they're pertinent. This talks about the evaluating the human exposure dangers, which I think we already addressed. And then the final question is safety, Batavia and Geneva residents a consideration when planning a WCF installation. So I think we've already addressed that also.
And that's FCC regulated.
We have this rather extensive list. I haven't read through it. I don't know if all of these, if these are new questions, if they've been addressed. I'd ask that while we're deliberating this, staff read through these, and then if there's any pertinent information that you feel we need to consider tonight.
Was that something that was given to us tonight?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if everybody got this or not.
I don't think we did.
Oh,
I think
maybe
she
it was
There
only-
might have only been 1 or 2
Yeah.
copies
Yeah, I did not
distributed.
get that.
It only went to the chair.
It was distributed
There was
Twice,
a couple
actually.
of- Isn't there a couple of them? There's one from Beth Hunter. Was there another one?
This is a lined item in the formatting.
Oh, okay. Good.
You have that? Okay. So I'll leave it to staff to read through those on their own while we're having discussions here, and then let us know at some point if there's any additional points we should consider. I'm going to move on. Sue, do you have any other questions? Because I have several more.
Oh, do you? Okay, I don't know if this is the time, but I want it on the record. Commissioner Schneider, who couldn't be here tonight, sent out an email to us and had a point to make on one of the conditions.
Okay.
So perhaps we can bring it up. I believe it is number 9 on the PD modifications, the plan development modifications. The only small concern that he has with this condition is that could we be more strict with time allowed? And in that condition, it says that prompt, you will do have a prompt, how did they put it? I forget. It gives too much, he felt that the word prompt gives too much leeway what is it, a prompt, where are you? Oh, prompt construction or striping by the applicant of additional parking spaces upon determination by the city if they needed more. You had said, so I think that was just in the wording that he wanted a little more specification on prompt.
You know, we could set a time limit, certainly, reasonable time limit, 12 months.
Yeah.
Because I assume there'd be some design and, you know, related to that, what happens with the stormwater when that gets built? Because I know that, I believe your civil engineer talked about that the added impervious does not put you over the threshold that requires you to provide stormwater, any additional stormwater at this time. But I would assume that the added land-based parking would.
So let me introduce yet one more engineer tonight. Tim, you still there?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Tim Brown. I'm a civil engineer with Erickson Engineering. Can we scroll to one of the site plans? That one's fine. So we split ours up to try and provide a little more definition on the site. You can see in the front we are not adding much impervious at all, and on the, if you want to scroll one down.
So that's 90 degrees to what we've been looking at.
Yeah, sorry, everyone. So there's a large gravel area on the north side of the western addition, and according to City of Batavia engineers, we reached out to King County first and then to City of Batavia after we were told by King County that Batavia is an authorized community and all of the reviews for stormwater will be done by your staff. They informed us that all of the existing aggregate will be counted as an impervious area, and we get credit for removing that area.
Can you point to that again? Sorry.
Sure. Actually, you want to move up 2 slides so you can see the existing. So this is the existing aggregate.
Oh, okay.
All the way in the back
that's
here.
Currently considered impervious.
Correct.
Gotcha.
And there's even other impervious, and actually we have an exhibit all the way in the back of the engineering
Yeah, I remember
document that
seeing
is colored, so that it might be a little easier to discuss from that slide.
But you're removing all of that gravel, and that becomes
Correct.
the play area, so that's now
Correct. So we get it's a little further down. Right there.
Okay, nice.
Yeah. So we get the benefit of removing all of this area. You can see all of the gray shaded areas are current impervious areas that we are removing.
Okay.
There are some of the blue with the dashed cross-hatching is all areas that are currently existing that will remain currently impervious and will remain impervious, and the red crosshatch is proposed new impervious. So those areas, the red area minus the gray area, gets us our detention requirement, the 25,000 net impervious that we've been talking about.
Yeah, you're under that.
Correct.
I think he said you're at like 15 added.
Yeah, and we have that little table there in the corner, and I believe you are correct, it's 15.
But if you added the land bank parking,
Yes,
would that put you over the threshold and then require?
that's our understanding at this time.
Okay,
yes.
so where would you provide the stormwater at that time?
We have options to put in a small pond in the, on the east side of the property, on the north area of the racetrack. And then we'd also potentially have to do underground detention on the west side of the building.
Okay.
So that would go underneath
So
the.
you've already anticipated what that might require.
Correct. And, you know, we've not done detailed calculations. Those will be done at the time we submit for permit.
And of course, the expectation is we won't need it.
Yes.
Okay, so you say pond, would that actually hold water, or is that a dry basin and only full in a storm event?
Right, that would be designed as a dry basin.
Okay. So it'd be basically a depression or maybe a berm on the north
Right,
side
yeah,
because it's
right,
already.
this area, there's a large slope that goes to the north. So, right, we would just provide a berm that would block that drainage temporarily.
Yeah, which wouldn't impact the current topography of that property.
Right, you wouldn't be
Pretty much
able to
remain
notice
the
it from a visual perspective because it'll be basically up against that tree line.
Thank you. Sorry, Sue.
No,
It was your question that got expanded.
that's good. That's fine. Helps.
Tom, anything? Anything over here?
Is there a sidewalk from the building on the western side to the tot lot? And the,
I'm sorry, between the western addition and the existing building towards the tot lot, there's a door out onto the parking lot into the tot lot. So the tenants have access right out of
Oh, they
that
do?
corner, yeah.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah,
they
the-
basically walk down the corridor and then go right out the door?
Yes, yes.
And how would they get back in the building?
There'd be a card swipe in.
Okay.
That'd be
So there are
another,
two primary entrances.
yeah, that would,
But the residents would have access.
yes, I forgot. They would have to have a card access to that door out to the tot lot in the field.
Okay.
And so it is, what's good about it is that it's clear access and it's protected.
Nice.
what I asked?
As far as the design of the building, I'm going to ask a few questions. First of all, I can't imagine living in an apartment without vision glass,
Yeah.
personally. And I was struggling with it in the limited area that you were proposing initially. And tonight, we've been told now the entire east facade is not going to have vision glass, with the exception of, again, below that 4-foot sill line. That's just a comment.
Understood.
I know
And
you can't
think I've
specifically address it.
I think I've, tried to be clear that we understand these apartments are not going to be for everybody. They're not going to be to everybody's tastes. But we also believe that the building itself offers enough sort of visually distinctive and interesting features. The idea of living in a loft apartment is attractive enough to a large enough audience that there is an audience for this housing. We understand it's a different audience than a more conventional building, but again, this building is unique.
You mentioned that it will obviously be required to meet the building codes, energy code, but you also said that the glass block is a terrible
That's right.
thermal insulator.
Mhm.
So how do you get past the energy code with that issue?
So we'll have to do really high-performance windows where we do the windows. We'll have to insulate every outside wall that we can, including up into the structure. So all the wall, other than the glass block, will be insulated up to an R19, probably with foam insulation. Then we'll insulate the roof as well. Then we'll have to also seek other energy advantages with our lighting and our efficiency of we're using water-sourced heat pumps. So we'll have high efficiency there. So we've done a preliminary analysis on the mechanical side, And also, you get credit working with an existing building. You don't have to meet the new building standards. So preliminarily, my engineer believes we can get there. So there's also going to be a high-efficiency heating and cooling equipment. So we're going to have, and then on the thermal load side, certain elevations are going to have interior blinds to cut down on the heat gain. And certain units will have to maybe have a little more air conditioning, like a couple of zones of air conditioning on the southwest corner. So we'll do everything, with everything that we do, we'll do as high efficiency as possible.
So
And
all
we-
of that combined, you're confident you can meet the energy code?
The initial analysis where we did a total takeoff of the areas and all that's involved looks like we can meet the energy code. We've actually done a preliminary back of the envelope calculation of that, yes.
And so that would just include the reality that the windows will not be good thermal barriers.
Yeah, the glass block, I
Yeah,
think
the
it's an
glass block,
R, it's an
sorry.
R3, I believe, yeah.
And there's nothing that can be done to improve upon that. Someone came up earlier and talked about some kind of film being applied.
The film
they
that
said it
w-
was mentioned in the HPC meeting.
The film that we were talking about was the below sill windows, where we have to do the film on the glass to make it
Oh,
appear.
really?
Yeah.
So
This
they're
is
making you put that on there to further diminish the transparency or the
So-
aesthetics from the exterior?
So that glass is 50% transparent, so as you look out, you can look out and see. Like I said, it was mentioned, it's looked like you're looking through sunglasses. So you can see out, but you can't see in. But the idea is to give it the appearance of the brick and then to make it flush with the brick. And all we're trying to do is reference the fact that it was a solid wall and not a punched opening and not a window opening per se.
Is that a design feature or is that the state agency requiring that?
That's the actual detail that we finally came up with that actually makes it viable as a possible historic project.
Okay.
It's just about the only way we can skin the cat that satisfies everybody that's involved.
Okay.
We did a mock-up of it. We really feel actually proportionally it'd be nice. There'll be 4 of these windows per unit, so there'll be a lot of windows in each unit. And it gives us our natural light and vent.
Everybody
you're-
see me?
Yeah.
We can see you.
If you're so inclined, for the Historic Preservation Commission on Monday night, Dennis and I went over and we taped off a number of these openings on the building with masking tape so you can see the actual locations and actual sizes. Feel free to walk over and take a look. What's interesting about it, somebody mentioned that they thought the windows were only, 3 feet above the floor. That's not the case. The sill is about, 15, 18 inches above
The sill has to be 15 inches above the floor, so you have appropriate reach to operate the window. And then it's another almost 3 feet, so it's
Okay.
4 feet. So as you're sitting down, you can see out nicely.
Can you just go through a little bit of the proposed exterior improvements of the building itself? You talked in generalities about repairs to the masonry and the block. Obviously, the historic block is limited, the availability is limited. Were you intending to move it from other areas of the building to replace it in the front where it's needed to be repaired?
So there's at least 3 generations, if not 4 generations, of existing glass block on the building. So the 8-inch glass block, which is on the predominant historic portion of the building, when we put the windows in the back of the building and when we have interior walls that are covered by the additions that exist there now, we'll be able to salvage the existing glass block and do all the repairs to that 8-inch glass block with original glass blocks so it'll match. The tower has a number of 12 by 12 glass block that are the original size of the glass block on the whole building. At some point, they saved a lot of that block and placed it on the north elevation. So we're going to take the 12-inch glass block off the north elevation and do the restoration of the tower. Then the other windows in the lower additions will have to, again, salvage glass block from the existing areas and rework that into the wings. So the wings are, for the national people, are not considered historic, but they're considered influential. In other words, you have to respect the east-facing elevation of those wings as they relate to the historic property. That's what they're concerned about. They're not concerned about the rest of it. And we have to tell you, there are windows on the north and west on all those, there are vision windows on all those units. So the only kind of, finesse we have to do is on the first floor, the lower units. The second floor is a public gallery that we're maintaining, so all those windows are to the west and to the north. And then the third floor is the same way.
There's no product out there that you could replace portions of the glass block with transparent block?
Well, they don't allow us to do that. Yes, there are transparent glass blocks. Yes, I know what you're saying. We've come a long way from the ideal and the issues that you bring up to where we are now. We looked at windows and we looked at transparent. Again, it's this, and I think the important thing that we need to understand is that historic tax credits represent a 20% investment in the project. So they're worth multi-million-dollar investment that make the building viable. Without it, you're not there. So they're a partner in this, in other words.
So, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. So the project's not viable without those tax credits? The two gentlemen sitting there. But I also feel like it was kind of a detriment to the viability of the project as a commercial development, just because you can't see out. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, I guess, and I just wonder about the landmark status and, what, obviously, we're way down the road, but personally, I would remove the landmark status to make those units livable units, because I just...
Then you'd be back to Mr. Block's analysis of the lack of viability for...
Well, then you lose correct.
So anyway,
that's the answer.
We're back to full circle to the, yeah.
Yes, thank you. I don't have any more questions at this time.
May I have one?
Sure.
Just in reading one's question tonight from the public, and this one has to do with the original proposal to the IHDA, and in your first drawings, apparently there was a room for garden sites, garden plots for the residents, and they're not seen in the final draft. Is there a reason?
Correct. As we have worked with Kane County, as we have worked with the city of Batavia, we also go through an iterative process with IDA, the state housing agency. And on our initial application, we did indicate garden plots as part of our scoring regime. It's a competitive process to apply for the housing tax credits, and the developer needs to commit to achieving a certain number of points for resident amenities. And it's a menu of items that you can choose from for resident amenities. So the original thought was to have garden plots, and I think now the soccer field and the tot lot concept have replaced the garden plot as the scoring amenity that IDA accepts. So it's part of the iterative process of getting this deal designed and developed.
Thank you. So a lot of modifications. We can go through them one by one if you want. I don't know if anybody has anything specific that they have concerns about. They were all read off, so I'm not going to reread them.
Good. Here? Yeah.
Okay. Oh, yeah, modifications, okay.
Minimum parking setback, any concerns with that? It's been fairly well explained. With the added right-of-way along Fabian.
Is this where we could add where would we add the sidewalks?
We can add anything we want at any point, but I would say let's walk through these, and then we can talk more specifically about if we have any concerns with these, and then anything else we want to add. Staff has a whole list of conditions and recommendations that we would do at that time. Land use mix to allow 18% of the first floor space adjacent to the street for retail. rather than the required 25%. I think this is a unique circumstance personally that I don't personally have an issue with that.
No, I don't either.
Anybody have an issue with that? Then number 3, the transparency. Obviously, we've kind of exhausted that topic. The project isn't going to go forward if they put vision glass where the glass block is.
Still don't like it.
No, we don't have to like it. But that's a variance request. Really, that is related more to the, again, the mixed use and the commercial application of that on a street front. So it's really not applicable here.
Right.
But obviously for residential use, I think it is. Building entrances, again, that is related to the situation where you would have commercial development along a street front and you would want access into those businesses. Here they provide obviously some restricted entrances into the residential areas and any additional required exiting from the building. Beyond that, it doesn't make sense to pop a bunch of doors into the front of the building. Regarding the parking field landscaping separation to allow, so that's, I think, in the front where you wanted to maintain the racetrack, and normally we would put landscape islands that would separate the parking areas, similar to what you've done in the back.
Actually, technically, we meet the code requirement in the front because we have fewer than 20 spaces in a row there. What I think this is referring to is the width of the little islands between them. The code says 20 feet. We've reduced those to, I think, 8 or 9 feet, just to try to get the right number of parking spaces in here.
Really, what this was intended to do was to not have very large, expansive parking lots without having significant landscape relief as part of the interior of the parking lot. What's being added to the front oval area, the front oval area, I believe it's non-conforming now. What they're adding to the front isn't really affecting the non-conforming status. There are a couple of areas at the front of the oval where they actually do provide a 20-foot landscape separation, kind of on the inside of the oval on either side of where the new parking in front of the building would be. Those landscape areas actually have a 20-foot dimension, minimum dimension, so it would comply. On the west and to the north, along the west wing is where the new parking areas along the west wing. That's where they're not providing the 20-foot separation, and certainly if the land bank parking is ever built, what they're showing would not comply with that.
Okay, is that clear?
Is there a smaller separation that is being provided?
There is no separation that would meet the intent of that code that's being provided. What is being provided are landscape islands that are spaced throughout the site to provide trees, where we do require trees as part of a parking lot.
Commissioners have any questions or concerns related to that? Okay. Parking setback and landscaping material setback overlay district related to the south parking area. So again, that's related to the additional right-of-way dedication. Parking supply, we've, I think, exhausted that topic. Is commissioners comfortable with the proposed amount of parking with the land banking opportunity? Monument sign landscaping, again, I think that went back to the state agency not allowing landscaping in the front lawn area. Is that correct?
I'm sorry,
Landscaping for the monument sign?
a lot of that is caused by the relocation of the right-of-way. And if there is a place to put landscaping, we would try and work with the applicant to have landscaping that maintains visibility.
So it is possible to have landscaping around the monument sign?
Depending upon the ultimate design of that access point, it's possible.
Would the commissioners prefer to have landscaping around the,
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say yes.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's allowed, we would like to see it.
Right, but there are minimum requirements of so much of a mulched area extending beyond the base of the sign. And then you have to put plants in there as well as a tree proximate to that. The way the modification is worded is that it would allow simply to provide less, and the hope is that we could work together to find
To allow
a
less.
reasonable
Okay.
amount of landscaping.
Great, thank you for that clarification. Same thing with the Fabian Monument sign. Well, that one's,
That's in the right-of-way.
yeah, that's related to the right-of-way. And then finally, number 10, wireless communication facility support structure to allow existing wireless communication facilities that exist there now. Conditions, anyone have anything on the conditions? There's a lot of them there.
Yeah, there's just a number 13. I had a question on it until Joel read it, but the word avoid was left out of it was tree species diversity to avoid a monoculture tree areas.
Well, I threw that in when I
read it,
said
you
it,
put-
but really it's wherever there are monoculture tree areas, just increase the species diversity.
Okay. I just,
Yeah, I agree with that.
Number 6, because we've talked about this quite a bit. Best efforts to provide transportation for grade school children. Is there anything specific that we can, more specific, I guess, that we can
I
say,
think we
or
should just
stronger
take-
language?
I think we should just say shall provide transportation.
Yeah, instead of shall use its best efforts.
You've already
No, I
offered
just
that you would do
shall
that.
use its best
Yeah,
efforts.
that's what I meant.
Shall provide.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. I don't,
Yep. We
Okay.
can live with that.
All right.
We've talked about the expanded parking and the enforcement of that.
so did we, with number 9, did we decide that we wanted to put 12 months as a time period on there? Or to have, in replace of the word prompt?
If you want, oh, yeah.
what did you suggest? instead?
As opposed to prompt,
12 months is thrown out there.
Gene brought that up
Yeah.
in his correspondence. Within 12 months. Is that acceptable? David?
Yes.
And I don't necessarily know the answer to this, but what I'd like to see, and I know there's a lot of constraints, but I'd hate to lose that tot lot recreational area if additional parking is needed. So I guess I'd like to see some kind of application, at least a plan to maybe have a recreational area, so that if additional parking is needed, we don't lose that. Exactly how to put that into words, I don't know, but.
Yeah, well, again, we can add any conditions we want to our recommendation.
There may be some opportunity to squeeze it, even with the land bank parking, there may be some opportunity to squeeze it in north of the land bank parking, or maybe northwest of it, depending on the trees and things.
That's a good
I mean, the
point.
grading obviously is an issue, but, I mean, that they would have to look at that as a possibility.
Because it could be possible too that they don't need to put all 301 in, maybe it's determined that,
Correct.
half of that's needed.
Right.
Correct. Okay, so I don't have anything else on it. Anyone else?
Can we add things?
Yes.
Okay, so we would add the sidewalks along the east parking?
In the front?
in that the racetrack. I don't know where sidewalks would go, but
We clarify, are you looking to have that,
for safety.
no, I understand. Are you looking to have that go all the way to Fabian, or are you just having it to access the parking lot itself?
I would like to see it go down the driveway to Fabian.
Both-
I'm sorry,
both sides?
Not to Fabian, I don't mean that, I mean to 31.
That's what I meant. I meant 31, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so did I.
Yeah.
Led me right.
And both sides,
Mhm.
so that anyone getting out of their car
Like a
can walk to
little walking
the
path.
inside of the racetrack, get on a sidewalk and get up to the building.
Actually, I think it would probably be on the outside of the racetrack, because if you're on the inside, you have to cross the drive in order to get down there. I think what we could probably do is have a sidewalk that's on the exterior here.
Okay.
That would wrap down and then would connect to the sidewalk, and we can have one up here that connects to the building sidewalk.
Okay.
And then down to the sidewalk on 31. I'd like to request that in this condition, that it is subject to approval by the Batavia Historic Preservation Commission and the State Historic Preservation Office and the National Park Service.
Yes.
Because if they say no, we just can't do it.
But it should be noted, isn't there also a Pace bus stop on that side?
There is a Pace bus stop on the northwest corner. So yeah, the sidewalks connect to that bus stop location.
Any other conditions?
Well, you wanted to add
Yeah, I mean,
consideration.
I'd like to add the consideration that if we do have to go into the land bank parking, that there's an area that we can still have for recreational use for the tot lot or the soccer field.
And where would that be located?
Is it in the northwest?
Again, I think looking at the site just north of the sidewalk location, we do need to look at the slope of the site there, because this piece of the site slopes much more heavily toward the ravine area than this piece of the site. So we'll need to look at feasibility. We have not analyzed that yet. We can commit that if we are required to displace either the tot lot or the soccer field or both as a result of building land bank parking, we will find an equivalent recreational amenity on the site. But again, it needs to be subject to approval by the relevant historic preservation authorities.
Find that acceptable?
Can I have clarification on 16? It says land cash contributions per city subdivision regulations. Which city? The Batavia or?
Batavia. It's the Batavia subdivision regulations that apply.
But it would be
So-
paid to the Geneva School District.
Okay. Okay.
Is that the special service area that is being proposed? No. Okay.
No,
Is it
that would be separate.
25,000?
It would be whatever it is based on the bedroom counts.
Yeah, we've calculated it. The school fee is approximately $25,000, and the additional park service fee, I think, is about $116,000 or something like that. Those are the two fees that we've looked at in your ordinance.
Okay, I see. Land cash contribution. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that is for park and school, just to
Yeah,
clarify.
okay. Mm-hmm.
Other items? I'd like to propose a drop-off zone, a dedicated drop-off zone at the front in the area that we discussed.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't designed it yet, but we'll figure it out.
Did you say something about a right-in, right-out? So,
I think,
It's later, isn't it?
Tom, you brought that up?
Pardon?
Didn't you bring up the right-in, right-out concern on Fabian?
Yes.
would that be
That's,
dependent upon KDOT?
Yeah.
that's going to be a KDOT issue. They may end up imposing that on their own.
Right.
So, I mean, we don't know that for sure yet, but that may be something that they just impose because of traffic safety.
Can we make that a condition?
Subject to approval.
Well, I mean, does everybody want it right in, right out?
Yeah, I do.
So you're going to restrict access to that drive on Fabian for primarily, well, anybody coming into the site or exiting the site?
They would require a left turn lane if we don't.
Yeah, unless they've got a left turn lane going in there, because I suppose that's more people then who are going to be continuing east, turning to go north on 31.
Mhm.
If there's no left turn access.
Right.
You have some comment?
Yeah, no, basically, if we make that, again, we have to work this out with KDOT, but if we do make that right in, right out, we got some concerns with the fire truck access, because to control the right in, right out, we're going to end up putting a pork chop in that driveway. And that will make it a little more difficult for the fire truck to use the connector road and things like that.
Especially for the
So,
Where's KDOT on this topic? I know they've commented. Was there anything related to this driveway?
KDOT did comment on it, on the plans, and theirs are advisory only. They're not making any modifications. This proposal is not making any modifications to driveways, so they do not actually need a permit from KDOT for anything. These were recommendations that they had based on, what they would like to see in an ideal situation, recognizing that, the petitioner is dedicating the right-of-way free of charge to them as well for future roadway improvements. So they are, in a perfect world, yes, they would like to make that a right in, right out. They think it's, eventually should go away, especially if there's going to be intersection improvements that are going to require dual lefts, because that would end up going away anyway.
I personally would leave it in the hands of the experts and KDOT in that instance, if and when those roadway improvements are made and they deem it's appropriate to modify that entrance. Again, back to current use. At full capacity, the intensity would be at or above what you're proposing. Correct? I mean, that's what you said earlier, so.
Yes.
I mean, if you feel very strongly about right in, right out, what you could ask is restricted turn, in a sense, from morning 7 to 9 a.m. or 3 to 5 p.m., no left turn sign to be placed at the entrance or exit out. So you could ask for that. So a sign, informing people not to make the left turn lane between those times.
And emergency equipment would be exempt from that, right?
Yes, you could.
They're going to break the rules. Let's face it.
So
They have to.
that will be a compromise rather than imposing a right in, right out. And KDOT indicated that they can change that access to right in, right out any day. Their staff has the authority to make the change. So
What do you think of that? I kind of like that.
I do too.
It's kind of nice middle ground, and so during the heavy traffic times, I don't know if we'd work with you to determine what those are, or with the traffic engineer, what's appropriate. It's like 7 to 9 or 6
yeah, I
to
mean,
9.
we have the traffic count. I mean, they did the traffic count during the rush hour, so we can say this is the peak time. So a couple of hours in the morning and a couple of hours in the afternoon.
So we could leave it to the staff to work through the specifics of that requirement.
And we have to get KDOT approval for it, obviously.
KDOT?
KDOT, yeah, because it's KDOT's road.
Pending.
KDOT would have to approve of it as well.
Okay, interesting. So even though it's a private drive.
It's KDOT right-of-way, so they have the access control.
right,
So
the signs are in the right of way, and
Oh, okay. I was
you
like,
can't
what?
even cut the grass without getting a permit.
Gotcha. So you put the sign up there, they have to approve it.
Yes.
Okay, we would expect that wouldn't be an issue with KDOT, though.
Probably.
Yeah, makes it safer.
We agree.
You'd be fine with that?
We're fine, yeah.
Okay.
Probably would be the same for people coming out of that there in the morning, right? I mean, we're talking about people making left turns during the busy time.
We're saying morning and evening rush hour, basically.
Right, but
We
I
would
mean,
restrict.
Signs for people going in and signs for people coming out.
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's what you're suggesting.
It will be mostly for people coming out. Going in would be hard.
But, yeah, it
Because
would be
if you
hard.
make that, we could have the discussion with KDOT and see what they would prefer. I mean, if you restrict that left turn from the eastbound, then they will go through the intersection and make that left on 31. Now, if it is the commercial traffic or volleyball people, you don't want to restrict them and send them through the racetrack down all the way. So you probably don't want to do that.
It's so busy in the morning with people making left turns on from 31 onto Fabian going west. You know, for somebody to come
Right.
out of there and try and make a left turn, coming out of the building. I mean, you've got so much going on at that intersection with the left turns, right turns.
So in the morning, we are expecting that residential people will be leaving in the morning. They will most likely make the right turn or left turn out on 31. So that probably will not be an issue. It's the Fabian that mostly people are worried about. So in the morning, we are going to restrict them not to make the left turn on Fabian between, let's say, 7 and 9 a.m.
Okay, so you're talking about the people who are coming out
of the-
there from the building, okay.
Because we have heard that the queue length goes past that driveway in the morning. That's what people have indicated. So you are pretty much forcing the residential people to make the right turn on 31 and come out on 31.
Rahat, could you just introduce yourself? I'm not sure the Plan Commission knows who you are.
No, okay, my name is Rahat Bari and I'm the city engineer. I introduced to most of them and I've been sitting here for the last 3 meetings.
Right.
It's like, who is that guy?
And
Thank you
just
very
keep
much.
in mind that the commercial use, most of the existing commercial uses have very little morning traffic, so, I mean, it's not going to hurt in terms of a left turnout restriction when the eastbound traffic backs up from the signal. There's less of a backup in the afternoon, but.
I know there's a fitness facility in the back there. I would guess that there's,
They're
you know,
later in the afternoon and
early
evenings.
morning activity, you know, kind of rush hour times, but I don't know how many cars come.
It's a little bit, but in terms of all the commercial users, there's.
I've just heard it's really tough to make a left out of there. So, you know, having that connection drive to the front is going to really help from that perspective. They can get out and make a right-hand turn on 31.
Yeah.
So that's critical. Any other conditions that we want to add? The only other thing I wanted to mention was the resident amenities that we talked about, benches, et cetera. I don't know if there's anything specific we want to suggest.
Can that be included in a condition?
Yes?
Okay, I would certainly suggest that we do, that considerations be given to
Again, I'd have to say subject to approval
Yeah,
of historic
subject.
preservation authorities. If you want to tell me how many benches you'd like, 3, 4, you know, we'll put in benches, so.
okay.
Yeah, maybe a couple along the front sidewalks that you're going to add, and then obviously back around the tot lot area. I assume that those would already be included with the design of the lot. Any other specific related to benches? Any other outdoor
There's-
recreational areas we want to propose?
There's room between the building and the landscaping?
The building and the landscaping is about 20 feet
There's the 20 feet, and you don't want to.
in the front,
You don't want to put a bench between them.
but there's no real access to that area. It's,
Okay.
has a hedgerow
But in
that separates
front-
it.
In front of.
Yeah.
In front.
It's really to accommodate the vision windows at the lower
Correct.
portion of the wall. And then screen those aesthetically from the street so that the kind of original integrity is maintained in the aesthetics. Any other outdoor amenities that we would want to propose? How about a swimming pool in the open?
No, I
You
don't
guys are
think-
killing me.
I don't
They
think
do
so.
have a fountain in the original picture we were sent, you know, for the open house. There's a beautiful fountain.
There's a
Preservation
fountain,
Partners
right, a
So
fountain.
that was original.
If I may suggest maybe trash
In the landscaping?
receptacles periodically.
Arborvitae's?
Yeah, benches, trash, I mean, truly that, if that oval could be landscaped and there could be, a gazebo or a fountain, benches, landscaping, that would be the perfect place for it.
Pergola.
But you're thinking the state agency's gonna go,
Nuh-uh.
no way?
Yeah, I mean,
Even though we have this historic photo that shows a fountain?
that,
Is it
I didn't
authentic?
get one.
Is there any suggestions that we would want to make in that area?
No, I don't have any suggestions.
But, other than the benches right now.
Okay, so just the benches and trash receptacles?
Yeah, and trash receptacles, that's right. How about bike racks? By the
Yeah,
way?
I thought you had addressed that in the original presentation, but could you refresh our memory where the bike racks are?
I don't know that we have bike racks. We have some large, rooms on the second floor that will be community amenities for the building, and we have room for bike storage in there so that tenants are not keeping their bikes in their units. Although these units, I think, have enough space in them that tenants may choose to keep their bikes there. In terms of bikes on the exterior, again, if you want to include a bike rack that's part of the site furniture with benches and trash receptacles, we can certainly bring that to SHPO.
Okay. And one in back too, by the
I'd say yes.
playground. I would like to include that.
I can't read it. I think there was one on the back side of the building, actually,
Is that like that?
on one of the earlier plans.
Yeah, I thought there was,
Like, basically
Where are you trying to
directly
find it?
behind the tower on the west side of the building.
Okay, so we're at 10:35.
Yes, we are.
There's a lot more to go. Probably another, I'm going to say optimistically hour, but probably hour and a half to two.
Or more.
Do you want to continue tonight? Do you want to continue
I would
to
ask,
another night?
could I ask staff if next week's agenda is, or our regular meeting is full?
The 6th?
We do have a public hearing for another proposal scheduled for that evening. If you feel that you would like to pick up from where you're leaving off at now with no additional information to be provided,
Right.
I think we can schedule that activity after the public hearing is conducted for the other project.
Okay.
On the 6th.
Can schedule that if that's what you like. We can pick up right where we left off and no additional information to be submitted or presented. We can pick that up. We can pick up the discussion.
Yeah, I'm concerned. I know personally I still have a lot of discussion
Right, I wanna
points I'd like to
read some
review.
more.
And when we get to findings, I think.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
We've got findings.
Mr. Chairman, what about the additional questions? I'm hearing staff say that they're going to be occupied with preparing for the other matter. Is that right, Joel?
Yes, the assumption would be that there would not be any more information given to the Plan Commission from staff, nothing through staff, nothing by staff. We would just pick up with where we left off with the discussion. We can do that at the next meeting.
Obviously, there's a lot of information that was delivered by those who spoke tonight, and we haven't had a chance to review that in any detail, so that would give us that opportunity also to look at that information and just take it into consideration. And then Bill had mentioned, the possibility of a tour. I don't know if that's something that anyone's interested in.
We have to remember that if the commissioners would be touring in a group of 3 or 4, that would be an open meeting, and it would have to be noticed, and anybody could attend that. I'm not suggesting that a tour not be done, but that would add time to the whole
We
process.
give tours every hour on the hour. We have a nice sound and light show there. It's pretty cool, so.
We'll just set them up hour in the hour, one commissioner at a time.
We are,
As a commissioner, because this is an open petition, you do have the right to go and view the property on your own if you wish to do so. So
Oh.
it's not official tour, but you can enter the premises, not the building necessarily, but.
Knock on the door or just?
Yeah, but I think you're talking about the interior.
The building lobby, the stairway, the front door, there are
It's open.
tenants in there now who have active businesses, and so it's open. You can go in the front door during business hours.
Okay.
You can go up to the second floor. I mean, if you haven't been in the lobby, it's really cool. So
Yeah.
feel free.
I've been in there, it's been a long time, so I might do that. I think we can just avoid each other
Right.
out there.
Tell,
Makes sense.
text when you're going.
Have an
Going in.
agenda.
Can I bring up one point? Earlier this evening, Commissioner Peterson read something from Commissioner Schneider that she said Commissioner Schneider shared with everybody. Commissioner Schneider did not share that with everybody. The email came in to me, and I forwarded that to the plan commissioners, and each one of them received it individually from me and not from Commissioner Schneider.
Yes, that's right. Thank you.
Okay. So are we all in favor of continuation to September 6th?
Yes.
We do have another item on the agenda that could take up some time.
Would you like me to make a motion?
If everyone's in agreement, unless you want to continue, but
No.
I think that's
No.
not wise.
okay.
I think it's unwise.
All right, so, yes, please.
I so move that we continue this meeting till the evening of September 6th
7 PM
at 7 PM in the chambers.
in this location. Do you have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so we'll continue. Thank you all for coming. Welcome back on the 6th.
Thanks. We'll see you next week.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Oh, yeah, we haven't adjourned yet.
Yeah, we still have an agenda, so we'll,
This would have been crazy.
we still have a meeting in progress, so if you want to have conversation, please take it out to the lobby. Thank you.
Or to the street.
Hopefully it'll go quickly.
I have one question. If we are in other business, are we?
Well, we're on matters from the public.
Oh,
Other matters.
Oh, is there anyone here that would like to speak
yes?
aside from the Campana project?
Guess not.
Guess not. So now we're on
No.
other business.
No takers.
I just have a question about the Aldi. We approved that they're doing their exterior, right? And we asked at the time, will there be any changes to the interior? And they said no. And now there's going to be, and they're going to be closed for a month. So is there any explanation for that?
I don't know offhand what the situation is. I know that they're remodeling all of their stores,
Yes.
interior and exterior. so-
Right,
They-
right. But at the time, they just said absolutely just be the exterior.
I believe they did at the hearing say they would do some renovation of the interior, but at that time, they thought they were not going to have to close it at any point. I think, you have to check with Jeff, but I think basically,
It's not, wasn't under our jurisdiction.
no, I think they just had more significant stuff that they needed to do, where, yeah.
Just the facade, right? So I'm
Is he leaving us?
disappointed. A month or so, they'll be closed. That's all.
I have a question for other business. It has to do with the One Washington Place. Is it appropriate time to bring it up and ask the question?
What question's that?
Depends on the question.
The question is that the estimated price to building it has gone up a couple $1 million.
More than that.
And
It was 6 to 8 is what I read.
anyway, what Shodina is now working with the staff to change things to bring the price down.
We're looking at options on what can be done to value engineer the project or to, make some changes that would, be able to save the money or reduce the cost of development. So we're still working through that thing right now with them, yes.
How about eliminating the top floor? No.
Well, I think the point of the question is, we've reviewed and approved something. So how much flexibility do you have in, quote, value engineering, which to me is cheapening the building, basically, changing materials, et cetera.
Well, I can't really comment on that.
Before it
at
has
this
to come
point.
back to us.
Yeah, well, obviously, if it's a substantive change, it would have to, get approval from the Historic Preservation Commission and you. I'm not anticipating that that will be the case. I think it's, some more of the internal construction things that are being talked about rather than exterior facade stuff.
Okay.
So.
All right. Thank you.
Motion for adjournment?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That was a question like Jeopardy.
We're adjourned.